The title is Me, and these are stories of my life. And they're written by me, and I'm Katharine Hepburn, and I'm going to read this to you. I have a friend who keeps asking me why I've written this book, especially as I've said 1,000 times, me. No, that's personal. No, I'm not going to talk about that. What made me change my mind? I wonder myself. Something changed me. I think, I'm not saying I know, but I think that I've always thought of myself as an actor. Now in the last few years I've seen that creature whom I created sitting around. She's sitting around saying, "Hey, what goes on? What are we going to do? We're wasting time. Let's get going." "Shut up," I said. "I'm sick of you. I'm not going to hide behind you anymore. Who are you, anyway? You're not me. You're that great big beautiful doll. You're the lucky side of the coin. You were born at the right time. You looked right. You sounded right. You were lucky. You caught on. You got rich. Good. I'm glad you had a good time. Now, I'm going to take over." "What is that you're saying? Who am I?" "Well, I'm me. I'm what is called the power behind the throne. I am your character. Isn't that what they call it? Your do this, don't do that. I'm your fundamentals. I run your ship, you're the ship. You're getting a bit long in the tooth, and I may not be able to sell you as easily as I used to. You have a right foot which doesn't work all that well. I mean, it hurts. In 1982, you ran into that telephone pole. Dumb of you. Dumb. Listen, so it hurts, but at least they didn't have to cut it off. Yes, of course, it threw your whole balance off. Your body balance right off, and now your back is painful too. Gosh, what do you expect? You've just taken your body for granted. You're lucky you had a good one to begin with. Oh, yes, those 2 shoulder operations, rotator cuffs. Isn't that what they called? Yes, of course. Oh, yes, you're right. Hip is fake. When did that go bad? 1973. Oh, that was quite a while ago, wasn't it? Well, you're lucky. That operation really worked. Oh, hell, you're lucky. You can see, you can hear, you can bicycle, you can garden. Yes, kneeling down, but that's restful, isn't it? Kneeling down. Anyway, here's where I come in. I'm your character. I don't think that you've ever realized how handy I've been for you. I've been there. I tell you what that means. I'm your backup when you make a decision which is poor, and what you become involved in doesn't work. And here I am, trying to explain it away. You know what I really am? I'm my main gift from my parents. And when I realized this, I also knew why I had suddenly become interested in writing this book. I wanted to discover the real reason back of all the fluff, that bit of fiber which can be developed in all of us. There it is, it's waiting to be used. That is what suddenly struck me. How did I make it work? How did I have brains enough to survive that play, The Lake, and the early failure of my movie career, the box office poison period? And how did I develop such a handy head of common sense? That's what really keeps you afloat. You can say, you had enough money to swing it. Yes, I had, but money alone doesn't do it. I wasn't going to starve, but I could have been defeated. It's finding out where you went wrong and correcting it. For instance, in The Lake, I let Jed Harris, the producer, push me around. I knew that I was being pushed around, and I didn't talk back. I didn't say, look, I'm the one who has to sell this, and if you make me into a mush, I'll just be a mush. And I was a mush. The tale of The Lake of my survival was extremely important to me. I learned responsibility to say, talk to me, I'm to blame. And the movies, same sort of half-assed way. I let myself say yes, okay, instead of, no, I don't like that script. I'm not going to do it. To learn responsibility. Each of us has to learn responsibility. Here we are. Live up to your potential. But what to do? Well, don't you see what I'm doing and why I'm doing it? I'm telling you my life story. I've been driven to it. What else can I do? So before you begin, I have to warn you that what follows does not follow a path. When I say story, I mean stories of my life. And when I say stories, I'm afraid I mean flashes. Before I tell you anything about myself, I would like to tell you, or at least identify for you, the world into which I was born. My background, I mean, of course, my mother, my father, my two parents. Mother died when I was 40-odd. Dad died when I was 50-odd. Thus, I had them as they were always there for 40 years. There. They were there, and they were mine. From where I stood, Dad at the left of the fireplace, Mother at the right of the fireplace, tea every day at 5. They were the world into which I was born, my background. My mother, Catherine Martha Houghton, was born February 2nd, 1878. She was the daughter of Caroline Garlinghouse and Alfred Augustus Houghton. Alfred Houghton was the younger brother of Amory Houghton, who was the head of the Corning Glass Company. It started in Cambridge, Massachusetts, moved to Brooklyn, and ended in Corning, New York. Alfred's first wife had died, leaving him a daughter, Mary. He then married Caroline Garlinghouse. They had 3 daughters, Catherine, Edith, and Marion. Alfred and his wife were happy. They were financially comfortable, not rich, not poor. He played the violin, she played the piano. They were interested in Robert Ingersoll, the great agnostic, and they went to all his lectures. They had abandoned the recognized church. Alfred was about 20 years older than Caroline. Apparently his relationship with his older brother Amory was complicated. Amory had fired him for the glassworks because he was always late. Then Alfred became the head of the Buffalo Scale Works. He was a moody sort of fellow by nature and a victim of severe depressions. During one of these episodes, he was visiting Amory in Corning, and he disappeared. He was found dead of a self-inflicted gun wound in the head on the railway tracks. No note, nothing, just dead. So my grandmother, Caroline, was left with 3 daughters to bring up. Then it was discovered that Caroline had cancer of the stomach. She knew that she was doomed to die in fairly short order. Caroline dreaded leaving her girls to be brought up by any of their available relatives whom she considered hopelessly reactionary. She wanted her daughters to go to college. She visited Bryn Mawr College with my mother, Catherine. She made arrangements for Mother to go there and made arrangements for the other 2 daughters, Edith and Marion, to go to Miss Baldwin's boarding school, which was almost next door to the college. By the time her mother died, Catherine was 16, Edith 14, and Marion 12. Catherine was filled with her mother's feeling about the future. She wanted to go to college to Bryn Mawr. She wanted to lead her younger sisters in the right direction, and she was not about to let Uncle Amory boss her around. Uncle Amory, by the same token, was used to having his own way. He thought the girls should be girls and should go to finishing schools and learn to be ladies. These girls wanted an education, to be independent. Everything seemed at a standoff. Then Mother realized that she was old enough to appoint her own guardian. Uncle Amory was the one who managed her money, but he was not her legal guardian. She threatened to appoint a man very unfriendly to Uncle Amory as their guardian, and forced his hand and got her way. She went to Bryn Mawr. The girls went to Baldwin, and later they both went to Bryn Mawr. When Caroline Garlinghouse died, she was 34 years old. She must have been a very strong character. My mother talked a lot about her beauty, her strength of character, her determination, that the daughters get an education and live lives independent of the very dominating Amory Houghton Corning Glass group. Her credo, go to college, get an education. I felt the enormous effect my grandmother must have had on my mother, who was the eldest of the 3 girls. So my mother was the one who received the powerful philosophy of George Bernard Shaw. This is the true joy in life, the being used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one, the being thoroughly worn out before you are thrown on the scrap heap, the being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. Don't give in. Fight for your future. Independence is the only solution. Women are as good as men. Onward. You don't have too much money, but you have independent spirits, knowledge, education. Make your own trail. Don't moan. Don't complain. Think positively. My dad, Dr. Thomas Norval Hepburn, he was born December 18th, 1879. He was a year younger than Mother. He was the son of Reverend Sewell Snowden Hepburn and Selina Lloyd Powell. He was the youngest of their children. Dad's mother was the member of a very important and distinguished Powell family. As with other families in the South, they had been quite impoverished by the Civil War. Dad really loved his mother. They were very close, and he developed a high regard for the female sex through her. She was his ideal, a fighter with the highest standards. She believed in education. Grandfather was a minister in the Episcopal Church, never made more than $600 a year. Dad went to Randolph-Macon College in Virginia, took a B.A., then an M.A., then he went to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore to study medicine. He met Mother's sister Edith at Hopkins. They used to fence for exercise. Mother and Dad met at Edith's apartment. When he met Mother, she was fascinated by him and took a teaching job there in Baltimore in order to snag him. She succeeded. They saw a lot of each other. Dad seemed to her to be very interested in her, but he didn't propose. She began to think he was just stringing her along. Finally, in desperation, she said, "You know, the great thing about our relationship is that whenever one of us marries, it won't hurt our relationship at all." Dad was indignant. "I don't know how you could say such a thing. If I don't marry you, I shall never marry anyone." Mother said, "May I take this as a proposal?" Dad said he'd been proposing to her for 6 months. She was too literal-minded. Where's your common sense? Dad was offered several very good jobs in New York hospitals, but he thought New York a poor place to live. Mother and Dad were married. They moved to Hartford. They wanted to have a big family. They were both dedicated to the bettering of the position of men and of women. At the beginning, Mother and Dad lived opposite the Hartford Hospital, where Dad was an intern, and then he was a resident. The residents were supposed to sleep in the hospital at the end of a bell. Well, Dad found a house just across from the hospital on Hudson Street, strung up his own bell system. He was very fast on his feet, and as he was never late, he was never found out. Time passed, and Mother was walking through the park one day, Tom, her first son, walking along by her side, and me, Kathy, being wheeled. Well, thought Mother, here I am, these 2 adorable children, handsome, brilliant husband, looking forward to his brilliant career. But me, what of me? What of me? Is this all I'm here for? There must be something. She went home sort of puzzled, and Daddy came rushing in and said, "Look, here in the paper, a woman named Emmeline Pankhurst is speaking about women and the vote tonight." They went. Dad obviously had begun to realize that Mother was getting a bit restless about her spot in the world. He found the solution. Mother became the head of the Connecticut Woman Suffrage Association. Women, their problems, the vote, prostitution, the white slave traffic, teenage pregnancy, venereal disease, and huge public meetings. Mother had a booth at the Connecticut Fairgrounds, and we had a gas cylinder in the booth so that we could fill balloons. Votes for women, balloons, purple, white, and green. I was about 8. I used to fill the balloons, tie a 6-foot string onto them, go out into the street, pursue visitors to the fair, follow them until they were willing to accept one of my balloons, whether they wanted one or not. In what was a rather insistent voice, I said, "Votes for women, here, take it, votes for women," and they took it. Brought up in the midst of all this, Tom and I were used to being in parades. We were used to being, snubbed in the most subtle sense of the word. There were many people who violently disagreed with what Mother and Dad were aiming at. Gradually, the majority joined our side, and Mother was right, and Dad was right, of course, And naturally, we were on the right side, too, and it was all for the benefit of the helpless and the oppressed, the poor, of course. The things Mother and Dad fought for turned out in their favor. Our house at tea time was a meeting ground. We kids were allowed in, but we didn't do much talking, if any. We met Emmeline Pankhurst, Margaret Sanger, Rebecca West, Richard Bennett, any number of distinguished doctors and professors. The door of our house was always opened. My parents would say, come in, tell us about it. Come with us, spend the night. No, stay to lunch. No, there's plenty of room. Always. Mother and Dad were perfect parents. They brought us up with a feeling of freedom. There were no, rules. There were simply certain things which we did, and there were certain things which we did not do because they would hurt others. And I think to myself, how I miss you two. I was so used to turning to you. It was heaven, always to have you two to turn to in despair and joy. There you were, strong, funny, two rocks. What luck to be born out of love and to live in an atmosphere of warmth and interest. We were a big family. Dad and Mother had 6 children over a period of 15 years. Tom, Kath, Dick, Bob, Marion, Peg. We were a happy family. We are a happy family. As children, we were Tom and me, Dick and Bob, then Marion and Peg. I was much older than my sisters. To them, I was really another grown-up. They were 11 and 13 years younger than I am, almost like my own children. Bob and Dick were closer, but they were boys. When I went to college at 17, they were 11 and 13, so as kids, we really were not living as equals. It was my parents and me, and Tom, and then the kids, the children. As children, they used to visit me in New York. I felt as though they were mine. I'd dress them up. I'd take them to the theater, to movies, museums, all the excitements. Mother used to tutor them when money became a bit scarce in the early 30s. She was a wonderful teacher, and the girls adored it, and her. I was a sort of rich aunt, and we had great fun together. I'm sure this was why I never had children of my own. What can I say? The luck of having Dad and Mother. They really loved each other. Dad with his red hair and his hot temper. Some say I'm like him. I hope so. I would be so proud. Mother with a real savvy of life. She adored him. She adored us. She was deep. She was witty. Some say I'm like her. I hope so. I'd be so proud. They loved reading aloud. Shaw, Emerson, O'Neill. They took what life had to offer and they gobbled it up. Some send off a real set of values and a sense of joy. So, I was born 80-odd years ago, May 12th, 1907, despite everything I may have said to the contrary. In Hartford, Connecticut, 22 Hudson Street, then opposite the Hartford Hospital. The street doesn't exist anymore. The hospital grew over it. Hartford is the capital of Connecticut. It is a charming city full of parks and hills and even elm trees. Some lovely old houses, good skating, skiing in winter, hot in summer. Very soon after my birth, we moved to 133 Hawthorne Street. Hawthorne Street had a fireplace with "Listen to the Song of Life" scrolled across the top. It was a lovely early Victorian house with 3 peaks, the center one a bit higher than the other 2. Red brick, painted, with a black lace trim. It doesn't exist anymore, either. It was next to the Arrow Electric factory, east of us. Ours was a long and fairly wide piece of land, with a stream running along the factory side at the bottom of a sort of little woodland of trees, mostly hemlock and pine. At the front of the property, the driveway was a big circle to the front door. The house was about 70 feet from the street. In the winter, when there was a heavy snow, we'd enclose that circle in a high wall of snow, very thick. Terrible battles would ensue. It was like a feudal town. The lawn was deep, and it ran back to the railroad track. To the east there was a gulch with a lot of trees so that we couldn't see the factory. a sort of woods full of daffodils, jack-in-the-pulpits, trillium. Oh, you see that hemlock tree on the west side of the property? That was the tree I used to climb. The neighbours used to call my mother, say, "Kit, Kathy is in the top of the hemlock." Yes, I know, don't scare her. She doesn't know that it's dangerous. There was another tree, an elm, which played a big part in our lives. It had a tall trunk and it went up straight without any branches. About 60 feet up there was a strong branch, almost parallel to the ground, growing straight out. To this branch, Dad tied a swinging ladder. We'd climb up this long wooden ladder to get to a trapeze, which was on a pulley, which was all set to ride a rope, which went from the elm to the very back of our long property. We'd climb up, we'd get onto the trapeze, sitting or hanging by our knees, and ride down the rope, which, of course, started high up and it went down to ground level. It was thrilling. Across the gravel path, down to our back door, across the back lawn to the end of the property. It used to terrify people. Dad was a very good athlete, and he wanted us to be. If we lived, said Mother. Mother, not being an athletic type, would suffer as she saw her daughter riding the trapeze over a gravel walk, hanging by her feet, high in the air, hanging by her heels. But she kept silent. She thought it looked fun. On Sundays and holidays we'd walk in the woods. We'd climb, we'd swing trees, climb up as high as we could, then, holding on as tight as possible, we'd swing our legs out, bend the treetop over to the ground. It was great fun. Because of Dad, we were the center of action, and because of Mother, we were always able to provide cookies and ginger ale or sarsaparilla or birch beer. But the greatest gift she gave us was freedom. Freedom to be noisy. Freedom to yell. No nags. Do it, yes, do it. Tell me about it. I went to the West Middle School when I was a kid, for public school, kindergarten, and then on up to 5th grade. I headed a group of kids who wanted Police Officer O'Malley left at the Farmington Avenue and Laurel Street crossroad. They had decided to move him to a different location. He was fun. We liked him. We petitioned and we won. O'Malley stayed with us. At the east end of Nile Street was Trinity Church. The daughter of the pastor was my great friend, Florence Miel. She was pretty. She had gorgeous curly brown hair, long. I was freckled, wore my hair like a boy's, shaved. In fact, with one brother, Tom, older, and my 2 younger, Dick and Bob, being a girl was a torment. I always wanted to be a boy. Jimmy was my name, and if you want to know. I loved diving. Hell, I loved all sports. I was skinny, and I was very strong, and I was utterly fearless. There was a pier at Fenwick, our summer house, and a diving board on the pier. The height of the board from the water naturally varied with the tide. There was a railing on the pier about 2.5 or 3 feet high. In order to get a better spring, because I was quite skinny, I'd stand on the top of the railing, jump off it to the end of the board, and dive, either a jackknife, a swan dive, a 1.5, a somersault. Running off the end of the board, I would do a half-gainer, standing on the end of the board, a backflip or a back dive. It was great fun. Golf became a sort of specialty with me and with my brother Bob. We went to Fenwick in the summer where we had a private 9-hole course, and as very young kids we could play at any time. We began at, aged 5. When I was 12 or 13, Mother started me on lessons at the Hartford Golf Club when we were back in town, for the winter, from an Englishman named Jack State. Mother, who had never had any athletic training, struggled with golf and with swimming and with diving. She believed in teachers. The winter, I was 14 years old. I decided to tutor instead of going to Oxford school. I wanted to be able to play golf every day. Well, actually, I didn't want to be in any school. Too many girls, too much curiosity. I'll tell you why. My brother Tom was 2.5 years older than I, had just died under strange circumstances. I adored him. Actually, Tom's death has remained unexplained. It was Easter time, Kingswood, summer vacation, or spring vacation, I suppose you'd say. The boys' private school in Hartford was on holiday. Tom and I were to go to New York to visit Aunt Mary Toll. She had a charming house on Charlton Street in Greenwich Village. She'd been at Bryn Mawr College with Mother. They'd become great friends. Auntie was a lawyer, and the house next door on Charlton Street was occupied by Bertha Rembaugh. Bertha Rembaugh was a judge. They were nice, and they were very successful. Mary Toll never married. We called her Auntie, and she was generous and fun. When we visited her, she took us to plays and showed us the sights of the big city. This visit, we went to the theatre to see a play called Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. When we got home from the theatre, well, I can't really tell you what I did, but as I later told the story, I said that Tom had looked at me and said, "You're my girl, aren't you? You're my favorite girl in the whole world." Why did I say this? Was it true? I mean, did Tom really say it? I honestly don't know. At Auntie's, Tom used to sleep in a sort of studio attic at the top of the house. It was full of junk and trunks, and it had no ceiling, just roof and rafters. His bed was a cot next to a wall. The facts were as follows. Next morning I went upstairs to wake him up, and there he was, next to the bed, his knees bent, hanged by a torn piece of sheeting. It was tied to a rafter. He was dead. He was strangled. Made no sense. In a state of numb shock, I cut him down, and I laid him on the bed. Tom was dead. He was just plain dead. What should I do? Whom should I tell? Auntie was too emotional. She'd be frantic. "A doctor, get a doctor, get a doctor." I went downstairs. I shut the front door. I'd seen a doctor's sign on one of the houses across the street. I went to the door, rang the bell. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning. The door was open, just a crack, by a woman peering out. "Yes?" "My brother's dead." A moment pause. "What?" she said. My brother, he's dead." "Then the doctor can't help him, can he?" "No," I answered. Bang. The door closed. She closed the door. She just closed that door. I stood for a moment. Yes, she's right. The doctor, it's too late for the doctor to help. I'd better go back. I rang the bell at Aunt Bertha's house. She answered. "Tom is dead," I said. Then I burst into tears. This was what I thought I should do. People die, you cry. But inside I was frozen. Aunt Bertha took over. She told Auntie. They called Mother and Dad. I just remember confusion then. We were on a boat crossing the Hudson with Tom's body, going to a crematorium in New Jersey. I can remember standing with Dad on the bow of that boat. I looked across at Mother. Mother was crying. My mother was crying. Oh, dear, what can I do? I've never seen my mother cry before, and I never saw her cry again. Never. She was stalwart. My father didn't cry either. He took what life had to offer. I only saw him once, what shall I say, thrown for a loop. It was one day in early 1951. Dad and I had gone to Fenwick. We'd driven to Fenwick, left Mother in Hartford to take her afternoon nap. We were getting back for tea at 5. We had tea every day at 5. When we got home, we walked into the living room. There was no fire in the fireplace. Mother's chair was empty. No fire. We rushed upstairs. We opened the bedroom door. Mother was there in bed, dead. I looked at Dad. "Oh, no. No," he said. "I can't. She can't. Go down, Daddy. Don't look. Go down, Daddy," I said. Mother'd had her nap every day. This was a must. She was getting dressed for tea. She must have felt something queer. She went from her dressing room into the bedroom, got into bed, and with her left hand was pulling up the covers, and bingo, dead. I stood. My mother, dead. My darling mother, the only mother I'll ever have. gone. I took her hand, still warm, unclasped her fingers from the sheet she'd pulled up, and I kissed her. And I went out to Dad. No goodbyes, just gone. After Tom's death, she went to Cedar Hill Cemetery when we buried his ashes, but afterwards she never mentioned him. She never said, "I'm going to the cemetery." Neither did Dad. They moved on into life. At first the newspapers said Tom had committed suicide. There was no reason for him to commit suicide that anyone could see. Then Dad made a statement that it was very possible that Tom was practicing hanging himself. Dad had told us about this trick of pretending to hang as a kid in football games or baseball. The teams that came from the North were very aware of the Southern attitude toward the Negro and felt that the Virginians, Dad was a Virginian, were cruel and felt superior to the blacks. As a means of irritating these Northerners, the Virginians trained several blacks to pretend that they were being hanged. Dad was an expert at this. It was holding his neck in a certain position, a trick that prevented the noose from cutting off his wind. Dangerous sport. Could it be that Tom was practicing this and using sheeting instead of rope? The noose was slippery, and he could not control it. Could that have been the case? Dad felt this was a reasonable possibility, and how this must have tortured Dad, but we never talked about it. It's amazing how Dad's and Mother's behavior left its mark. They simply did not believe in moaning about anything. The important thing was that Tom was dead. In the first terrible shock, Mother cried, but she never allowed the fact of his death to dominate the atmosphere. We were not a sad household. Anyway, this incident seemed to sort of separate me from the world as I'd known it. I'd tried school, but I felt isolated. I knew something that the girls did not know. I knew tragedy. They were curious, and I would not. I did not want to talk about it or discuss it. The school year ended at the end of May. I never returned to school. In the fall, I decided to tutor. My tutoring years were very pleasant. Being more or less alone did not bother me. We had a seamstress, Mary Ryan, who used to come every Thursday. I used to talk to her. She was Irish. She was very nice. Then I had a little theatre which I'd made out of a wooden box. It had a floor with lines cut in it. Every half inch it was green, the floor parallel to the front. I could stand the scenery, the cardboard scenery, and the actors in the cracks, and I'd make up the stories. I also had a curtain which I could open and close, and I'd give shows to my brothers Dick and Bob, and they seemed to like it. Dad used to take us to the movies every Saturday night. There were 3 theatres in Hartford that we could visit, the Strand, the Majestic, and the Empire. The Empire ran westerns, and it was easy to park the car. Silent movies, Tom Mix, William S. Hart, the Western heroes. I adored movies, I still do. Mother and Dad used to go to any good play which came to Parsons Theatre, and if we wanted to go, they'd get us matinee seats. I used to bribe Dick and Bob to go to the corner drugstore to buy me movie magazines. That's what I found fascinating. At the same time, they'd buy themselves and me ice cream sundaes covered with chocolate sauce and marshmallow and chocolate shot. These were called chocolate imperials. The money for these delights I used to earn in the winter by shoveling snow in our driveway and various sidewalks in the neighborhood, cutting lawns, leaf raking in the fall. The house at 133 Hawthorne, which Mother and Dad had occupied from early on, was to be torn down, and the Arrow Electric Company, the factory, who owned it, were going to extend their buildings to fill our 133 property. Dad, with 4 children and another on the way, could not wait to find a place. He found 352 Laurel Street, not anywhere as nice as 133 Hawthorne, but the best available at that time. Mother had adored 133 Hawthorne, the house, the property. It had real charm and distinction. She'd been heartbroken at the thought of 352 Laurel. I thought Mother was right. 133 was unique, it was beautiful, and 352 was really nothing much. Poor Mother, she never forgot it. And I remember thinking, when you have a choice like that, you must be very careful not to just go down a road because you'd planned to. If you have a choice, be careful only to be influenced by what is best in the long run. We were not rich, and Dad was thinking of the wasted money. Our house on 133 Hawthorne is gone, Victorian Gothic, 3 cables, trimmed with black lace. The driveway, the trees, gracious, simple, the brook, the daffodils, gone. Even the brook has been put into a pipe. Well, that's the style today. Pipe things, can things, freeze things, computerize things. Have to be careful about that. You can't develop a mind full of beauty or tender imagination and independence of spirit tearing along in a box without a bit of space and without a bit of air. Connecticut is home to me. I've been stuck in the snow. I've lost a house in a hurricane. I've tennised. I've golfed. It's been fun. I've lived there, and I'm going to be buried there. I was married to Ludlow Ogden Smith there on December 12th, 1928. My grandfather Hepburn, who was minister, officiated. Dad and Mother died there. Mother in 1951, Daddy in 1962. Santa, Dad's second wife, Madeline Santa Croce, was lonely in such a big house alone, and she moved into her sister's apartment. Dad was really the last inhabitant of the Hartford house. In 1960, 61, 62, Daddy began to feel rottenly. I remember having a long conversation with my brother Bob on the telephone about him. I was on the West Coast with Spencer at this time, so that I wasn't really up on Dad's situation. Dad would never complain about how he felt. He simply would not say that he was suffering. Actually, Bob said that he must have been in a terrible state. They discovered that he had a burst gallbladder. It had been full of stones, and of course his abdomen was full of stones, and of bile, too, hard as a rock. He was simply gradually being poisoned. Bob said the pain must have been really excruciating. Not a word out of Daddy, not a word. He found moaning about one's health totally disgusting. He was operated on by Dr. Wells Standish. His blood pressure went down, down, down too far, and finally affected his ability to think and to talk. Then he had to have a prostate operation. My brother did that operation. Wasn't customary to operate on a close relative, but Bob thought he could do it best, as it was his specialty. So he did it. Bob said Dad at this time acted really as though he were quietly studying his own demise. Never a word, never a complaint. He just endured, or he'd catch Bob's eye and he'd smile or wink at him. I got back to Hartford for a little visit. Daddy had moved down onto the first floor to the study, which luckily had a bathroom off it. He seemed happy as always, but much weaker. One morning, Bobby and I were eating breakfast in the dining room across the hall. We went in to see how Daddy was, and he seemed to be quietly leaving the world. He smiled, he looked at us, and he slowly stopped breathing. His chin fell. He closed his eyes. He was gone, just gone. Bob and I sat there. Such a remarkable man Dad had been, so strong, so definite, so tough, and funny. He'll never be forgotten. Such a powerhouse coming to the end of the trail. He wrote his own rules. He followed them to the smallest detail. Row your own boat. What wonderful examples, our parents. My, we were so lucky. Like my mother, I went to Bryn Mawr College. I was in the class of 1928. My first year, I lived in a suite, room and a bedroom, ground floor, first door on the right, Pembroke West. There was also a Pembroke East, and between the two Pembrokes there was a gate, and over it was a huge dining room. Having not been in school for several years, I was really not at home, and I was certainly not at ease with a lot of strange girls. I used to go to bed very early. Then I'd get up at 4:30 a.m., go down the hall to the bathroom, and have solitude. Hot, cold shower, John. I used to eat fruit and cereal and milk for breakfast, so that I could have that alone in my room and avoid too many girls. Actually, I finally avoided the dining room altogether. In the early part of the semester, I'd gone into the dining room. I started for the Pembroke West table. I was dressed, I can remember it perfectly, I was dressed in a French blue flared skirt, which buttoned up the front with big white buttons, and an Iceland blue and white sweater, which was popular at the time. I was painfully self-conscious, and to my horror I heard a voice, a New York voice, from the vicinity of where I was supposed to sit. Self-conscious beauty? I nearly dropped dead. God knows I didn't discover myself a beauty. Oh dear, no. I continued in the room. I ate the food, and that year I never went back into that dining room. My second year, I resumed with a girl I'd gotten to know, so it wasn't so bad. Anyway, I'd gotten used to the girls, and I suppose they'd gotten used to me. I belonged to a particular group, easy to function with the protection of a few others. These have more or less remained my friends, especially the ones living in New York or Connecticut. My last 3 years at Bryn Mawr were nowhere near as traumatic as that first one. I wasn't a member of any club then, but I acted in several plays, which was fun. I played the leading man in one play, The Truth About Blades, by A.A. Milne. I played the juvenile. I had to wear a wig covering my long hair, and a pair of pants which were a bit tight in the seat. I can remember one frightful moment when we were giving a performance of it at the Colony Club in New York. Somehow or other I managed to put my hand into the pants pocket, and then I sat down. Well, after a bit I tried to get my hand out of the pants pocket, and it was impossible. I tried several times. I got a bit confused and kept yanking. This turned out to be a splendid laugh. Before my senior year ended, I'd made friends with a man named Jack Clark, who lived in a house next door to the college campus. His best friend was Ludlow Ogden Smith. Jack had several friends in the theatre, and he happened to know Edwin Knopf, who ran a theatre company, a very good one, with big stars in Baltimore. I got him to give me a letter to Knopf, and one weekend my friend Laurette and I drove over to Baltimore. My mother's sister, Edith Houghton Hooker, lived there. I went to see Edwin Knopf, and he said, "Well, write me a note when you finish college." I finished college. Dad always said if you want to get something, don't write, don't telephone, be there yourself in person, harder to turn down a living presence. I thought, no, I'll appear myself. So I did. I went to see Eddie Knopf. I found my way in from the front. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a stage door. I heard voices. It sounded like a rehearsal. I opened a door so that I could see the stage. It was a rehearsal. I crept in and I sat in the back row of the theatre like a mouse. An hour passed. Then, to my horror, I needed to go to the bathroom. Well, finally, I had to go to the bathroom. The whole theatre, away from the stage area, was as black as pitch. I felt my way around the lobby, down a stairway into another lobby, and finally at John. Then I found my way out, and I went back to my spot. Another hour, and then a third hour, and then all of a sudden it was over and they were finishing. The lights in the auditorium came on. Eddie Knopf saw me. He walked up the aisle. He stopped by me and said, "Oh, you, yes, report for rehearsal, Monday, 11 o'clock. And he was gone. My God, I had a job. He knew me. He gave me a job. That Monday I walked into his office at 10:45. "I'm here for rehearsal." "You're in the wrong place." It was thus that I learned that there was a stage door. I went in. It was quite a large group. The play was to be the Tsarina, Mary Boland starring as the Tsarina. The parts were handed round. There were a number of young girls besides myself. I noticed that I had the biggest part. We were all introduced to one another. Then we sat around a big table and we read the play. Thrilling. My part was really very nice. Wasn't I lucky? The rehearsals were many and long. It was announced that the costumes would be assigned one morning at 11. Well, I thought, I'm going to get there early, and I got there at 10. I was not the first to arrive. I was the last. Well, that was a big shock. I wasn't as clever as I thought. And, of course, I got the worst costume, inches too short, not very becoming at the neck. And then something very strange happened. One of the girls came up to me and said, I was the first here, and I want you to take my costume. It's the prettiest. I was struck dumb. I'd hardly spoken to the girl. I looked at her. She had the dress on. It was lovely. Oh, but no, I couldn't. She stopped me. I'm going to be married, she said. I'm not going to be an actor, and I think that you are going to be. I think you are going to be a big star, and I want you to have my costume. Can you imagine anyone being that generous? Wasn't I lucky? I got the best dress by far, and I don't even remember her name. The play was about to open. I was totally ignorant of the ways of the theater, had no makeup, used no makeup except lipstick. Christie's number 2, bright red orange. Mary Boland told me what makeup to get. How to do eyes. I watched her makeup. She was so generous, gave me all sorts of bits and pieces. They were all very nice to me, the stars of that company. The play opened. I got 2 very nice notices in my little part. I was known a bit socially in Baltimore. Well, I hope that wasn't the reason that I was noticed, but for whatever reason the printed word said I was arresting, and I was given a part next week's show, The Torchbearers. This was another play which Mary Boland had done. There was a part for me, not a very good one. I knew I was not very good in it. When I got nervous, my voice would shoot up into the top of my head. Well, I didn't really know how to control it, know what the hell I was doing anyway. I talked to Kenneth McKenna. He suggested, when I left the company, that I should go to New York and study voice with a woman named Frances Robinson Duff. Ina Claire was one of her pupils, so was he. Duff was very well known. She's the best voice teacher in New York, Kenneth said. Well, why wait? I thought, hell, I'll drop this and I'll go to New York. I looked her up. I found out how much she charged. My father had been disgusted and heartsick over the fact that I wanted to act. He thought it was a silly profession, closely allied to street walking, that I developed into a cheap show-off, and that I was entering a shabby profession which was based on youth and looks, definitely a foundation of sand for a silly life. He wasn't about to be the financial back of such a project. My mother was all for it, anything. I wanted anything, just so that I didn't settle for the old routine of nursemaid to the rising generation. She thought women should give life a whirl, see if they could swing it so they could be more independent of the male sex. Daddy was for this, too. He just didn't care for the road I'd chosen. But I had saved up some allowance money when I went to Baltimore. I had over $250. That was a lot to me, but it wasn't enough for Frances Robinson Duff. So I wrote Dad a letter, which I thought would sell him the importance of training for the job I'd chosen. Would he back me? He'd already sent me $50, which he said he'd won on a golf match or a bridge game, gambling money, not real money. So he was sending it on to me. After that, of course, I knew that with a small push he'd be on my side. We were very close, Daddy and Mother and I. None of us liked the separate ways, so of course he told me yes, he'd pay for Duff. And so I left Baltimore, and away I went to New York City after the second week in Baltimore. Frances Robinson Duff was an experience. She had a house on East 62nd Street between 2nd and 3rd. She and her mother had been an opera singer. She taught opera. Frances was tall. She was about 5'7". She was stout. She had a big stomach, and she had a medium-sized bosom, and she was very corseted. Her office was on the top floor. She tried to teach me how to speak from my diaphragm. I would have to put my hand on her diaphragm, hold it there, my hand, as she pursed her lips to blow out a candle. Well, it was a strange feeling. I had my hand on the top of a corset, and it was somehow extremely embarrassing to me. I don't think that at that time I really got the notion of producing air from the diaphragm rather than straining the throat. Now, I can call, "Hey!" straight from the diaphragm, but my lack of success with really connecting my voice and the volume to the diaphragm caused me great worries in my career. I kept losing my voice. I'd get very hoarse whenever I played a part which was fast and loud. It was an agony. In a way, I can understand why I couldn't connect voice and diaphragm. Well, I think I was so excited by life and living in my future that I was simply wound up so tight I couldn't relax. So I was in the big city, New York, studying with Francis Robinson Duff. I didn't know the city at all, really, neither would you. I had the use of Luddy's car in New York. You could park almost anywhere in those days. It was totally unlike New York today. There was no FDR Drive, no West Side Highway, no George Washington Bridge. The Holland Tunnel was just about ready, the Lincoln not yet existing. In my area, the East 40s and earlier, East 39th Street, there were elevateds on 3rd Avenue, elevateds on 2nd. I'm talking about 20s and early 30s. Central Park was open to cars. I used to drive up there and park, spend the day. Very few people used the park then. There was no running. There was no Pan American building ruining the view of the silhouette of Grand Central against the sky. I moved into a big, empty family apartment of a college friend of mine, Meggs Merrill, at 925 Park Avenue. My days were really spent hoping that the telephone would ring, offer me a job. I didn't really know anyone well in the big city. Jack Clark and his two sisters, Aggie and Louise Clark, were there. They were from Bryn Mawr, the town, not the college. Their friend, Ludlow Ogden Smith, they had apartments on 39th Street east of 3rd, and they were all nice to me, especially Luddy, with his generosity about the car. Jack Clark was tall, skinny, fascinating-looking, about 30. So was Luddy, about 30, I mean. I was 20. Luddy was tall, medium weight, and dark. He was an odd-looking man, dark hair, dark eyes, far apart, pink cheeks, an odd nose. It was a long nose with a hump in it, a long mouthful. Well, I'm trying to describe him, but this description sounds ridiculous. He didn't look ridiculous, I can assure you of that. Luddy and Jack were really good friends. They both had money, not a great deal, but enough so that life was easy. Jack and Luddy were looking for trouble, but as far as they got was taking naked pictures, photographs mainly of me, lying on a big sofa, which they had in the living room. I posed with total confidence, as I think I must have rather fancied myself. I can't remember who else posed. They gave me blow-ups of the picture. I remember I put them in a straw basket with a straw cover, and it had a strap around it, and I had it for years. I can't remember when it disappeared. I think I must have thought to myself, if I don't look at them, they don't exist. Odd. Now, I still think that if I don't look at something, it doesn't exist. I never look at notices. They don't exist. Or at movies that I've made. They don't exist. My past sins, so to speak, they don't exist. But I was telling you about Luddy because it was really his generosity which sent me on my way. He was the soul of sensitivity. Luddy came from Stratford, Pennsylvania, which was several stations beyond Bryn Mawr on the main line. He'd gone to Grenoble to college in France. He was a fine musician, and he could pick up any language in a few days. He could function wherever. As I mentioned, Jack Clark and his sisters were then living in New York. Luddy was living nearby. I began to see them for dinner and the movies and whatever. Luddy had a car. He used to drive me to Fenwick for the weekends, and soon we saw more and more and more and more of each other. What did you say? Where did it happen? Oh, yes, of course. It was in the Clarks' apartment. They were all away, and, well, I guess that I knew that Luddy was in love with me, but you see, my hitch was that I was in love with myself. I mean, you know, I wanted to be a big star. Anyway, Luddy and I were alone in the apartment, and there was the bed, and there didn't seem to be any reason not to. Well, what I'm trying to say is that that's what happened. I mean, we did it. I mean, I guess the Luddy knew what he was doing, and I didn't object, so we did it, and that was the end of my virtue. He was my beau from then on. Listen, let me tell you, yes, he was my beau, and that's the biggest but you ever heard. He was my friend. He was really my friend. Well, my first job, the Knopf Stock Company, had suddenly decided to try a New York production with Kenneth McKenna of The Big Pond, a play which they had tried out with some success in Baltimore. They'd sent for me to be the understudy to the leading lady. Naturally, I was thrilled. I learned the part. I sat on the sidelines, quite convinced that I would be far superior to the leading lady I was watching, Lucille Nicholas. She was a very competent actress who didn't doubt have the advantage of being very young and absolutely outrageous and full of a sort of wild confidence based on nothing but energy and ego. Of course, I thought I was scared to death, but all I could say now is, looking back, I was not scared enough. Open a door, I'd go through, even if the room I was entering was on fire. One lunch hour after the play had been in rehearsal a week, they asked me to stay and play a scene. Pushed by a sort of frenetic boiling over, I must have read it very well. They fired the leading lady and they took me. I didn't, of course, know what I was doing, but I did it with great style. I took this change in my status as a matter of course. I was a leading lady, yes. I'd been in the theatre 4 weeks. This was happening just as I imagined it would. It should. I was arriving. Then a whirlwind of memories begged off Goodman for the clothes, the shoes, lots of flattery, the trip to Great Neck for a Saturday night performance. This was a very popular place to play a one-night stand. I drove out in my car. I arrived at the Great Neck Theatre at about 6 o'clock for the opening. Thought, well, don't go in, too terrifying. Stay away as long as possible. I could make up in 5 minutes. My hair was never a problem. Pretend it's not happening. Get in about 10 after 8. So I fiddled around. I ate my dinner, which I brought with me in a field, took a run, finally turned up at the theatre at 10 after 8, to the fury of everyone. But I got made up, I got dressed, I rushed on at my cue. Very quickly after my entrance, I had to do an imitation of Kenneth McKenna, who was playing a Frenchman, who was to be my guide in the play. My mother and father and I were touring Europe, supposedly. I had a good French accent. It brought down the house. They burst into applause. Well, naturally, I thought, well, that's that. I'm a star. Overconfidence flooded in. My voice went up. My tempo increased, and apparently to everyone but myself, I became very difficult to understand. Too high, too fast. I wasn't McKenna's leading lady. I was the star. He was my leading man. The play over, I noticed that no one was particularly bothered to come in and tell me that I was remarkable, but as I'd never really been a big star of an opening night, I didn't know what to expect. So I thought, well, they must have problems. It never occurred to me that I was the problem. Next morning I was about to leave for rehearsal when Frances Robinson Deaf called, told me to come to her house before I went to work. I said, I'll be late, Frances. She said, they won't mind. On my way to her, I thought, they won't mind? What does that mean? I got to her house. She sent for me. I climbed up to her studio, went in, and the minute I saw her long and very serious face, I've been fired, I said. Yes, she said. Well, at a loss for words. I'm not crying. Aren't you proud of me? No, she said, I'd be prouder if you were. That was the trouble with your performance last night, too self-contained. Well, fired, I said. Oh, dear, how embarrassing. Well, they must feel dreadfully. Who's going to play my part? The one who was, she answered, Lucille Nicholas. Oh, yes, I answered. Well, she must be very happy. That's nice, isn't it? Now, I think I'll just run down there to the National so that they can see that I'm not too upset. And I was off. Down to the theatre I went, burst in on them, congratulated the leading lady. They offered me back my understudy job, and I said, no, thank you. I thought that would be unwise. I thanked them all, and I left. What must they have thought? Then I took the train to Hartford, told my family they decided that they would never again miss one of my opening nights. That might be my only performance, and we all laughed merrily. Ha, 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 ha. Onward. Back to New York I went. The next day I received 2 calls, one from Arthur Hopkins and one from J.J. Schubert. I went first to Schubert. He'd seen my performance in the Big Pond. You were sweet, my dear, he said. There were women, men, gentlemen, riffraff, whores, ladies and children in that audience on Saturday night. They liked you, all of them. Yes, I said, everyone but the management. They were fools to let you go. I'm offering you a 5-year deal beginning at $250 and ending at $1,500. Yearly options. I thought quickly, don't buy a pig in a poke. Well, that's very reassuring, Mr. Schubert, but I don't think that I would like to be tied up to anyone so that I couldn't do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. Think it over. Don't be a fool, Catherine. Yes, I will, sir, and out I went. He couldn't believe it. I walked through Schubert Alley, down 45th Street to Arthur Hopkins' office, found the stairway, the back of the orchestra at the Plymouth Theatre, walked up. I came to his door. It was a small office. His secretary, Miss Hess, on the left, and his own tiny office on the right. Miss Hess told me to go in. I heard her telephone him, so I went to the door and I stood there. He was at his desk facing me, reading a script. Finally he looked up. Hello, dear. I saw you the other night. He smiled. You were good. I'd like to have you work for me. Thank you, sir, I said. I'd like to. He looked back at his script. I stood there. Minutes passed. Well, I thought, then, what am I supposed to do? That's that. He'd like to have me work for him, so I'd better get out. He seems to want to read, so I started to leave, and his voice called me back. Don't you want to know what you're going to do? Yes, sir. He reached for a script at the end of his desk. Read this. The part of Veronica. We go into rehearsal next week, Monday, 11 o'clock. I left. I had a job. The play was These Days by Catherine Clugston. My part was a schoolgirl, a nice part. We rehearsed in New York at the Plymouth Theatre. Hopkins had his own way of rehearsing. You'd sit around a big table and you'd read the play, and you'd read it over and over and over and over again until everyone knew it and felt that the play itself was thoroughly understood. Then in no time, on one's feet, the whole thing slid into place. This seemed to me then, and it seems to me now, a very sensible way of doing, jumping up immediately with a script in one's hand and wandering about before you know the part. I never could understand that. I'd do it, but I learned the play first. I suppose I was exposed to Hopkins' method early on, and it made sense. So if I know the play before I rehearse, I'm in a better position to feel where I'd like to be to play a scene, and in a better position to argue with the director. Having also studied the play very hard, so many actors say, oh, but I couldn't learn it until I know where I'm going. I never could see the sense in that. It's like saying you don't want to learn to walk until you know where you're going. Being one track, I have to learn it. Then my instinct tells me where to go, or the director does. Well, it doesn't really matter, standing, sitting, just so the audience hears it. We opened These Days in New Haven, then Hartford, my hometown, big excitement, then New York, Thursday night. The New York opening at the Court Theatre on 48th Street, the reviews were withering. I was praised. Friday night, everyone seemed a bit down. Not I, of course. I'd been praised, and that was the only part of the review, which anyone with any sense, well, certainly it's the only part that I read. To me, it was a hit. Just before my entrance, one of the stagehands patted my shoulder. Well, you don't need to worry, honey. You'll get another job in no time. What do you mean? I said. We're closing Saturday, he said. Oh, that, I said, pretending to, of course, know that. All the actors were piling into Hopkins' office to find out if he had another job for them. I thought, well, he knows where I am. If he wants me, he'll send for me. And so he did. Saturday night, report Shubert Theatre, New Haven. Sunday noon, to understudy Hope Williams in Holiday. I fitted right into the understudy job. Hope Williams was a big star overnight, a charmer with a unique delivery, great boyish looks. After being in Holiday as Hope's understudy for about 2 weeks, Luddy and I decided to get married. My grandfather was visiting in Hartford, and I had a pretty dress, a babani. It was crushed white velvet with an antique gold embroidery, sort of around the neck and down the sleeves and down the front a bit. So I told Arthur Hopkins that I was leaving the theatre, and we were married in the Hartford living room, with all the families present. We went to Bermuda for our honeymoon. Luddy was always an angel of understanding, luckily for me. I said, oh, yes, we'll live in Stratford, Pennsylvania, and we began looking for a house. Well, my enthusiasm lasted about 2 weeks, and we moved back to New York, and we centered ourselves in his New York apartment, 146 East 39th Street, and I went to Hopkins, and I asked for my old job back. He said, yes, of course, I expected to. Really, I said. Oh, yes, yes, he smiled. Poor Luddy, a proper wife for 2 weeks. Oh, Luddy, Luddy, look out. Later on in the fall, when Holiday was preparing to go on the road, Jimmy Hagan, the stage manager, called me at midnight. Hope's sick, he said. We're playing the Schubert Riviera Theatre on Upper Broadway. She doesn't think that she can play tomorrow's Saturday matinee and evening and then open Monday in Boston. So I went on. Yep, I went on in Hope's clothes. Now I'll never know how. I was inches taller than Hope. It was there and then that I found out how good Hope was and how I had to find my own personality in the part, not imitate hers. It was a baptism of fire. Places where she'd got roars of laughter, I got nothing at all. And by the third act, anyway, I found my way a bit. The rest of the cast were as excited as I was, and very helpful. Hope had asked me during the New York run if I would like her to stay home one night so that I could get a chance to play the part. I'd had the sense to say, oh, no, 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 just stay well. I was right. It's a poor second best at best to go on for anyone. After the big pond, after I had been fired, my pictures went into New York City, and they were in a stand on the sidewalk outside the Bijou Theatre on 45th Street. A man named Henry Salisbury at Paramount saw them, and he called me and asked me if I would make a test. Well, I thought, that would be dumb, wouldn't it? I'm not even an actor. I'm just a photograph. They'd sign me for very little. I'd have no control over what I did. I saw Mr. Salisbury, and I said just that. But I added, if I ever do make a test for anyone, I will make one for you. I thought that was very gracious of me. He took me in a big limousine to see the opening of a play with Jack Dempsey. Heavens, I thought, is this the big time? Don't hobnob with the bosses. You lose your mystery. I had no agent. Some people had agents then, but they did not control the business as they do today. Once or twice I went to offices. I went and I sat, and at the end of the day, the secretary, whoever it might be, would come up to me and say, why are you here? The only incident of note was when I said to producer Al Wood's secretary, I'm here to see about the girl in A Farewell to Arms. Oh, she said, that's been cast for a long time. She had a warm heart. Come on in, she said, and meet Mr. Woods anyway. So I did. He had a warm heart, too. I asked him who was going to play the part, and he said, oh, it's Landy. That was all there was to it. Lest they think that I was making any effort, I used to get myself up in a sort of slouch costume. I had an old stocking cap, or no hat, in a day of hats, and an old green tweed coat, and I'd pin the coat together with a safety pin, throw a sweater over my shoulders, string my hair a bit, very casual for those days. I wanted to look as if, well, it's really nothing to me if I got the part or I didn't. I had a car, and that gave me a sort of confidence. At least I could arrive cool. Actually, I didn't go out often to seek work. I was lucky. I was at the Empire Theatre one night. A perfect stranger came up to me, a man, and said, I beg your pardon, but are you in the theatre? I'd like to be, I said. May I give you a letter, he said, to the Theatre Guild? Thank you, I said. That was in 1929. The man was Maurice Wertheim, and he was one of the backers of the Theatre Guild. And do you know who he was? I just found out. He was Barbara Tuchman's father. She was the author of such books as The Guns of August and The Proud Tower. I presented my credentials to the Theatre Guild. The letter from Maurice Wertheim worked like magic. I met Terry Hepburn, also a Bryn Mawr, Lawrence Langner, Philip Muller. They were doing a play of Sam Behrman's called Meteor. Would I like to read for the ingenue? The Luntz was starring. Yes, I would. They gave me the script. Now, I may not have been able to keep a part, but I could get any part. I just had the knack. I could boil up out of nothing at a moment's notice. Didn't really matter whether I read the script or not. I could arrest their attention. I could laugh. I could cry. I was fast. It used to fascinate me. I'd think of nothing for days except I was going to read for something or see someone. I'd eat, I'd exercise, I'd sleep the moment. Then I'd drive over in Luddy's car and I'd be wound up tight like a steel trap, and I'd go to the bathroom 45 times before I left. Then I'd have to case the office for the bathroom before I went in. I was always very early, and then I went in and I read, and I was in a sort of coma of excitement. I was never easy with people, I suppose. I was in an agony as to whether I was making a good impression, but the concentration was total, not based on an intellectual conception of the part. Oh, not at all. Just based on the universal spark. I'd think, spark the part, spark the person, spark the audience. Strike it, light it. When all that energy became boxed, so to speak, and it couldn't get out, then I just didn't come off. I was always very aware of whether I was boxed or fluid. Take a bath, cold, hot, relax. How's the motor running? The intellectual part of studying came as a sort of framework, but the spark of life was, well, the spark of life is the spark of life. Laurette Taylor's great story, she was doing the glass menagerie. Laurette always seemed to me, Spencer Tracy too, both Irish, both troubled ones. She seemed to me to sort of sketch, be the inside of the part, the outside of the part, just indicate, dialing the phone, indicate anything that the audience had in its immediate experience, suggest it, let them get it, then get on with it, effortless, easy. Then suffuse, illuminate the character. One could never see the wheels go round. It was always a happening. There was a framework indicated. It was all magic. Spencer playing the flute as Judge Timberlane, lighting a cigarette with one hand, bad day at Blackrock, not heavily worked over characterization. Sketch it. They were my ideals, those two. I had first seen Laurette in the Glass Menagerie in Chicago. I was crossing the country with Terry Hepburn, Theatre Guild, flying L.A. to New York. One stop, Chicago. Terry said to me, Kate, would you like to stop and see Laurette's Glass Menagerie? Tennessee Williams? Yes, I would, I answered. I'd heard wonderful stories about Laurette from George Cukor, and I wasn't about to miss this opportunity of meeting Miss Taylor. We went to the Blackstone Hotel, then to the theatre, and backstage before the play, early. There was Laurette. She was sitting at her dressing table, nothing of a robe on, thin, fine, blonde, reddish hair, pin curls, just putting makeup on, dipping into this, dipping into that. Those eyes, blonde eyelashes, eyebrows, so far apart, so wide open, conveying a multitude of wild and moving and funny thoughts. Soft, big mouth, nose sort of verging on the clown, a vulnerable, sandy, Irish-skinned, ruddy look. George Cukor said once about visiting old stars when they're making up that they're surrounded by any number of empty jars, and they dip their fingers into the jar, and then they rub their cheeks pink, and they rub their lips red, and they rub their eyelids blue, violet. A line here, a line there, a powder puff, the lashes become black, all memory and magic. She undid her hair, sort of brushed it out, poked it up. She was like Spence. They were both like, well, they were like baked potatoes, fundamental, basic, nothing fancy, rough in a way, and all the time talking and funny and like a clown. The top variety. This was her life. She could do it. She knew how to do it in her bones. The minute she got to that little room, to the antechamber, a few strokes here, there, no agony of preparation, like the method, no constipation. She and Spence, they were able to show you, tell you, make you feel, arrest you, make you watch. It was the real life. The daily Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, with which they were unable to cope. That's what tore them apart. She was talking about Julie Hayden, who played the part of her daughter in The Glass Menagerie, and how at the curtain, when they were taking their bows, Julie had turned her back on the audience and knelt before Laurette. Really, I don't blame Julie, let's face it. One would feel inclined, but Laurette thought that was the bunk. She said, "Don't do that, my dear. I'll give you a push. I'll send you sprawling." Anyway, to get back to the point, Laurette's great story. Julie Hayden had been struggling with her part. Several months later, I saw the play again in New York. Julie seemed to me to be very much better. I said so to Laurette. Yes, she said, she's having a good time doing it, too. That's very important, having a good time. She went on, "I remember when I did Peg of My Heart the second time after a 5-year lapse. We opened in Philadelphia. The critics went on about how brilliant I was, how remarkably I'd grown in the part, on and on. Going back to New York to open the play there, I said to my husband, Hartley Manners, 'Isn't it nice that they think I'm so great?' He smiled and said, yeah, nice. But I like the way you used to do it, remember? You had such a good time." Laurette said she was furious with him. She wouldn't speak to him. And then she got to thinking, and she realized what a subtle and brilliant remark it was. It became her key. If you are aware of the expert work and the effort, it's tiring to an audience. This is true, oddly, whether the play is comic or serious. Anyway, I read Meteor in a state of great excitement, and the next day I went back to read. I got the job. Then the same thing happened, which always happens in the theatre. I got another call, the Schuberts. Would I please come and read for the leading part in Death Takes a Holiday? Well, yes, I would come right away. Oh, dear, I thought, what about Meteor? Well, try, pick the best. They sent me the script. I read it. I was swept off my feet. It seemed to me a wonderful part, romantic young girl going away with death, and a leading lady, and Philip Merivale and James Dale, Lawrence Marston directing. I read for it. I got it. So I decided that I must tell the Guild that I had a better offer. I did this, feeling a bit cheesy, walking away from the Luntz and the Guild. But my character, Grazia, in Death Takes a Holiday, seemed to me just a perfect offer. I couldn't resist it. We went into rehearsal. From the start, there seemed to be, well, there seemed problems. I had to scream. I used to go down into the John of the theatre and scream away. Never did get that scream to work. We went to Washington. The National Theatre opened. I got one rave, a new Maud Adams, and one roast, a new girl looking for all the world like a death's head with a metallic voice. Then we opened in Philadelphia again. One rave, one roast for me. I had not the vaguest suspicion that anything was dangerously wrong. That Wednesday night, the production man came back at half-hour and said, "Mr. Schubert is giving you the privilege of resigning from the cast." "Oh, yes, I see," I replied, holding on to my senses. "Will you tell Mr. Schubert that I have no intention of resigning from the cast? So if he wants to fire me, you go ahead and fire me, and shut that door now, and get out. I've got to give a performance tonight." I had to tell you, Kate, now before the show, he said, otherwise we'd have to pay you an extra week's salary. "Poor kid," I said, "just get out." Well, fired. I called home. I told Dad and Mother what had happened. That was the spring of 1930. I seemed to be getting nowhere. That summer I went for 2 weeks to Europe with Eunice Stoddard. Then I went to Stockbridge to Alexander Kirkland and Howard Strickling's company to play whatever turned up. My friend Laura Harding went with me. We were both Francis Robinson Duff pupils. Laura seemed very sophisticated to me. Luddy was hard at work in New York and would come up as often as he could. Then came Art and Mrs. Bottle. Kenneth McGowan and Joseph Verner Reed were going to do this play by Ben Levy with Jane Cowell and Leon Quatermain and G.P. Huntley Jr. and Noah Coward's friend Joyce Carey, Clifford Brooke directing. They had already done Twelfth Night. Art and Mrs. Bottle was to be the second play of a repertory season at the Maxine Elliott Theatre on 39th Street off 6th Avenue. They sent for me. I went up to see them. I read for them. They seemed to like me, and I was signed for the part. Any kind of English or WASP part I had a good chance at in those days. They didn't import too many English actors, and there weren't too many accents available. I was to get $125. We went into rehearsal. I wore my old rags to rehearsal, as they do today, but then it was not heard of, and I wore no makeup, only bright red lipstick. Ben Levy, the author of the play, thought me totally unattractive as to looks, as to personality, and as to talent. What does she do? Does she wash her face with yellow kitchen soap every morning? Ben Levy was almost right. I did fancy a sort of polished look. Jane Cowell took me aside. She said she liked me very much, but that Ben Levy was not accustomed to this type of American looks, and would I mind if she made me up to sort of soften my appearance, which she assured me that she liked, but that he didn't. So she made me up, and it didn't help. Ben Levy still found me unattractive, and they let me go. I, of course, thought they were stupid, and they'd rue the day. Well, they did. I was right. And after a week, they called me back. I said that they would have to pay me $150 instead of $125, as they'd hurt my dignity. I was traveling on pretty safe ground because I knew that everyone liked me but Levy, and they were running short of time, and they had tried all the available girls in town. They gave me the $150. They were a bit shocked by my Yankee trading. We opened. I made a hit. Noah Coward came to see the play, climbed up 5 flights to the dressing room, to my dressing room, to tell me that I was very good and to keep at it. I was in the process of discovering the enormous generosity and enthusiasm of people in the theatre. Often one hears of jealousy. I've never met it. I think it is such an obvious field for jealousy that everyone with any sense starts early in the fight against it. The season closed. I went to Iverton, Connecticut. Lawrence Anholt and Milton Stiefel ran a very good stock company there. Iverton was where I really learned a lot. They gave me a job as a sort of half-leading lady. I played when they couldn't get someone well-known. I'd done very little at this point in the theatre, but I was sort of known in the neighborhood because of Dad and Mother. We did The Man Who Came Back, we did Cat and the Canary, and then I did the lead in a play called Let Us Be Gay, which had starred Francine Larimore. That winter, during this summer at Iverton, the Gilbert Miller office called. Philip Barry had written a play called The Animal Kingdom. Leslie Howard was to star in it. There were 2 principal women's parts, his wife, his mistress. Phil wanted me to play the mistress, Daisy Sage. I read the script. I was transported. It was a wonderful part. It was really Howard's 2 separate lives, so that the 2 segments were separately rehearsed. The play was to go into rehearsal in about 4 months. Of course, I would wait. Oh, yes, I'd wait. And I agreed on terms with the Miller office. But I had not actually signed the contract. Luddy and I went to Europe that year. The time passed quickly. This would absolutely make me a star. The rehearsal started about November of 1931. I went dressed as neatly as possible in high heels. This was my first mistake. It made me taller than Leslie Howard. From the start, I felt there was something distasteful about me to Mr. Howard. Try as hard as I could to be subservient, sweet, feminine, anything which would tame down my too vivid personality. I struggled. Nothing worked. I remember one hideous moment when I said, "What would you like me to do here, Mr. Howard?" And he answered, "It must have happened. I couldn't have made it up." I really don't give a damn what you do, my dear. The next day we were to rehearse on our set somewhere across town west of 8th. I asked Walter Abel, the man who was my friend in the play, if I could give him a lift. We arrived at the place and I found that they had decided to rehearse the wife scenes instead, so we were dismissed for the day. I told Walter that I'd drive him home on our way uptown on 8th Avenue. I told him how terribly excited I was to have this opportunity, that I felt it would really get me going, that Phil had written this part for me. "Oh," he said, "no, nothing matters that much in this business. Of course, a great part, but there'll be others for you." "Oh, no, not for me." I said, "This is it." I dropped him, and as I was driving to the garage, a sort of feeling came to me. Was he trying to say something? Why didn't we rehearse? Was there something? Oh, no. I went home. As I went in the apartment door, my telephone was ringing. It was my brother Dick at Harvard. He started to tell me about the great party they'd give for my opening in Boston. Foreboding, no, I said, bad luck, don't plan anything. And at that very moment there was a knock on the door to the apartment. "Telegram for you, Miss Hepburn," said Mr. Bryce, the concierge. "Just put it under the door, please, Mr. Bryce." I concluded my conversation with Dick, went over casually, opened the wire. It was from Gilbert Miller, and it read, "Pursuant to Clause C1 in your contract, you are hereby given notice of the termination thereof." Heavens! Fired! I'd waited months for that part, and it was perfect for me. Why? Well, there must be some mistake. I'll call Phil Barry. After endless tries, I got him. "I've been fired," I said to Phil. "Yes, I know," he answered. "But why? Why should I be fired?" "Well, to be brutally frank, Kate, you weren't very good." "Oh, yes, I see. Thank you. Goodbye." I hung up. That was a desperate moment. I'd been fired because I wasn't any good. But I was good, wasn't I? What was wrong? I hadn't been fresh. I'd just shut up. Of course, I felt Howard didn't like me. I mean, I was too big or I was too small. There was something he didn't like. And no money, not a cent, and I'd waited 4 months for that part, and everyone would know about it, and what can one say? Well, you just have to say I was fired. Oh, that was a blow. It stopped me dead in my tracks. I felt so unwanted. I wondered, what was it about me that didn't work? There I was, fired again and very badly thrown. Get busy. The phone rang. Would I like to play with Laurette Taylor in Alice Sit by the Fire? Well, they didn't have to ask me twice. The night of the first day of rehearsal, I got a call from a man named Harry Moses for the Broadway production of The Warrior's Husband. I read the script. It was a wonderful part for me. Yes, I'd give up Alice, Sit by the Fire. If I got that part, I got it. The Warrior's Husband was originally a one-act play written by Julian Thompson. It was a Greek fable about the love affair between Antiope and Theseus. Hope Williams had played the lead, Antiope. Hope Williams is a real product of New York's 400. Easy distinction, independence, integrity, a lovely New York accent, great good looks, a slim figure, a boy's haircut, and a walk. Her walk was an arm-swinging stride. It was stylish, and it was original. Hope obviously had a tremendous influence on my career, vocally, walk-wise. I incorporated a lot of Hope into my so-called personality. It was in the air, really, that boy, woman. My arrival in the big city was well-timed. Hope had gone away that summer, and when she got back, Arthur Hopkins had found a wonderful new play for her. So I got Hope's Warrior's Husband. We opened cold at the Moroscow Theatre in New York. My whole family came. They were taking no chances this time. I had an entrance down a narrow stairway which ran across the backdrop. It was about 20 steps and steep. Then it swung around to the audience about 4 steps forward. There were lights on the upstage side of this staircase, and it looked thrilling. I had a stag on my shoulder, a tight tunic made of metal links, beautiful silver leather shin guards, showing the leg to great advantage, and a silver shield, and a high silver helmet, and a cape, a great costume, and I was very sure-footed. So the fact that the stairs were only about 3.5 feet wide, with a high, narrow step, and no railings, that didn't bother me at all. And anyway, I didn't mind risking my life for fame. I leapt down the stairs 3 or 4 steps at a time. I rounded the corner. I made one jump for the last 4 steps, threw the stag on the ground, landed on one knee, paying obeisance to Hippolyta, my sister, Queen of the Amazons. The audience, of course, burst into applause. Well, they could hardly do anything else. I'd all but asked for it, but I was unaware. I was just full of the joy of life and opportunity and a wild desire to be absolutely fascinating. At that point in my progress, I was sailing through the air anyway, down a stair, up a stair, no guardrails, hell, no stair whatever, no matter. Life, joy, youth. And I was pretty new, and I was presented to advantage, and I made a hit. The play they quarrelled with. I had it made for the first time, and she was tall and black and hefty and very dominating, and I can't remember her name. Lily comes to mind. I'm not sure, though. And she knew her job, and she got $75 a week, and she got that from me. That's what she wanted. That's what she said she wanted, and that's what she got. I myself was getting $150. The show ran for about 6 months, then we were asked to take a cut. I was cut to $75. She wasn't cut-minded, so she took the salary that I got as a star. What's money? What's money? Everybody wanted to test me for the movies. Everyone wanted me in something. The agents wanted me. I was arriving. In The Warrior's Husband, I began to feel for the first time like a real actress. My dressing room was on the stage level. It was a charming old theatre, the Morosco, oddly enough right next to the Bijou on 45th Street, opposite Schubert Alley, where the big pond had played, with my photographs on the outside. Both these theatres have been demolished. I didn't go out a great deal. Lottie and I still lived in that apartment at 146 East 39th Street. It was a brownstone apartment of 5 stories, apartments front and back. It was charming. The house had a dumbwaiter shaft, and you could have meals sent up from downstairs. The food was delicious. Really a wonderful way to live. I never got very close to anyone in the theatre or movies. I suppose it was because I was a member of a big family, and I always tried to get enough sleep. Sounds odd today when people say, what was he or she like? And I have to answer, I honestly don't know, but there it is. It didn't look as though The Warrior's Husband would survive. What next? David Selznick and George Cukor were looking for a girl to play Sidney Fairfield. The movie. A Bill of Divorcement. Clement Stain wrote it. An agent in New York, Miriam Howell, who worked for Leland Haywood, the American Play Company, came to see me. Would I test for the part? I said I would like to very much. It was a wonderful part with John Barrymore. She showed me the test scene. I said that I'd prefer to use my own material from Holiday, which I had understudied. They said, okay. I asked Alan Campbell if he would do the test with me. He said yes. Alan was later married to Dorothy Parker. He was a good friend of mine, an actor, sensitive and decent fellow. She was lucky to have him. Well, so was I. A man named Eddie Sens made me up. I seemed to myself to be covered with junk, very white, very thick, red lips, lots on the eyes. After doing the test scene, I took off all that fancy makeup, and I put on the makeup which I used in the theatre. Felt more like me, and I did my hair straight back as I did in life. I was determined to have it be me by me. I saw the tests a few days later. I thought, yes, that's not bad, that's not bad. I saw them 10 years later. They were heartbreaking. So desperately anxious, and I looked idiotic in my own makeup and straight-back hair. I thought I was being very nonchalant. Sad. I was far from nonchalant as one could get, actually. It was what I really was. I was a kid, desperate to be in the movies. It had a kind of truth behind the eyes. This test has disappeared, alas. Then I called Paramount and I told Mr. Salisbury that I'd done a test for RKO. Did he want me to do one for him? He said yes, would I do it in material from The Warrior's Husband? Well, I didn't, and it wasn't very good. Poor material for a test, but I had fulfilled my promise. George Cukor, who was to direct A Bill of Divorcement, liked the test. I was offered the part. After The Warrior's Husband closed, I went down to the station at Harmon to take the 20th Century to Chicago and the Super Chief to Los Angeles to seek my fortune. Laura Harding, my friend, decided that she would go too. It would be fun, and of course that was great for me. So, Laura was already on the train with all her junk and all mine. Laura had 2 dogs with her, Jamie, a Scottie, and Twig, a Shelburne Terrier. The first real friend I had in New York was Laura Harding. She was studying voice too, and she hoped to have a career in the theatre. She and I saw a lot of each other. She knew all the sort of highbrow customs of the time, and I learned the way, the Vuitton luggage, the clothes, where to shop, what to buy. Once we were in Hollywood, people gossiped about Laura and me, and I never knew it. We'd eat lunch in the restaurant on the lot. As you walked into the restaurant, there was a barber shop on the left. In it, a telephone. One day, Laura went in there to telephone me. I was working on the set. The person who answered kept saying, "Who is this? Who is this?" And finally Laura said, "Oh, tell her it's her husband." The director, Mark Sandridge, was having a haircut. He heard this, and he was absolutely shocked. He told me years later he thought that he must have been the one who was responsible for the very strong rumor that we were lesbians. Anyway, the rumor certainly started, and even New York was buzzing with it. Finally, after about 2 years, Laura went back to New York. She worked as an agent for Leland Hayward, who had become my beau. So, as I said, when it came time to go to California for Bill of Divorcement, Laura decided that she would go too. I'd not traveled much in the United States. I'd been to Europe several times. I'd been back and forth to Bryn Mawr. But to go west, Billy Burke and Ziegfeld, very ill, were on the train. Because of Ziegfeld's illness, our car was to be switched across Chicago and tied onto the Super Chief. I remember catching 1 or 2 glimpses of their drawing room. It was hung with special slipcovers, which covered the walls, the chairs, every object in the room. This seemed quite an extraordinary luxury to me, but it was really the thing to do, just as Louis Vuitton luggage was the thing to do. There were any number of musts in those days, which were definite indications, that you knew how to behave. Laura Harding knew what all these things were, and I learned them from her, the baby pillows, the blanket to make the drawing room cozy. This was way beyond anything that we knew about. I'd come from Hartford, Connecticut, a medium-sized town, but sophisticated. I certainly was not in the luxuries. Laura and I had a very exciting trip, wondering what it would be like to be in movies. We got off at every possible stop with the dogs, walked up and down the platform, had dinner in the dining car, lunch and breakfast in our own drawing room. In those days, there was no air conditioning at all. It was hot as hell, so very often we'd open the windows, filthy, so we'd close them. Then it was sweltering. We'd open them again. This particular day, I was looking out the closed window. "Oh, look, Laura, the new moon," I said. No, not through glass, Kate, not through glass. Bad luck, come on." We rushed out of the drawing room, through the train to the platform. To see the moon over my left shoulder and not through glass, I opened the door to go out onto the platform. Oh, something in my eye. Several things, in fact. Tiny pieces of steel rail, 3 of them. They lodged in my left eye, in the white part of my left eye, scratching the inside of my upper lid every time I blinked. They were there and they wouldn't move. I'd gone to Elizabeth Hawes, New York's highest-priced designer, to have an appropriate costume made to wear getting off the train in California. It was a sort of Quaker blue, silk grosgrain suit. The skirt was flared, very long. The coat was rather like a 19th century riding coat with tails. The blouse was a turtleneck with a ruffle around the top of the turtle, and the hat, well, the hat was a sort of grey-blue straw dish upside down on my head. I had long hair, screwed up tight. Someone once said à la concierge. The dishpan sat on top of this, a bit formal and more than a little eccentric. But it had been very expensive, the whole costume, and I had a great deal of faith in it. It was, I realize now, hardly an appropriate costume to arrive in Pasadena on July 4th with a temperature of 90-odd. A sweatshirt and an old pair of white pants would have been more appropriate. When we arrived at Pasadena, my left eye under my dishpan hat was bright red, and the other eye in sympathy was certainly pink, agony, and sweating hot. We were slowly coasting into Pasadena, past my first oranges and grapefruits, lemons, the sun, no smog in those days, the beautiful scent of the orange blossoms, and the dry soil, and my red eyes. We were pulling into the station. Suddenly Laura said, "Good God, that's Leland Haywood." "Yes," I answered, "he's my agent." "Head of the stag line," said Laura. "What?" I asked. "What?" "When I came out in New York," she said, "all the parties, he was the head of the stag line." What a scream! Leland Haywood was standing there with a short, heavy-set man, Myron Selznick by name. They were talking. I was so late at what they were saying. "Which one?" said Myron. Leland said, "The one with the funny hat." "My God, you're kidding," said Myron. "We got $1,500 a week for that." "She's an original," said Leland. "Yeah, very," said Myron. "What does she drink? Get a load of those eyes." After we'd greeted one another, I said, "Look, I have something in my eye. Do you happen to know a doctor?" But Leland interrupted. "Cukor's waiting to see you at David Selznick. They want to start as soon as the clothes are ready and the tests are done." And we were off. Soon we drove onto the RKO lot. George Cukor's office was small, a bit dark, ground floor. Cukor was an extraordinary, rococo fat man, medium height, full of energy, quick, bright, and great fun. "Well, isn't this fine?" he said to me. "Now, let me see. Yes, let me see." He looked me over. He summed me up. He summed Laura up. He looked at me. "Would you mind taking off that hat?" I took it off. My hair was hot and matted. "Would you mind cutting your hair?" "Well," I said. Then he turned to his secretary and said, "Call up Joanne and see if she can come down here." "Who's Joanne?" I asked. "She's the hairdresser," said Cukor. "Or better, we'll go up there." A man suddenly appeared in the door, 50-ish, obviously Barrymore. "Well, you're here," he said politely. He looked at me hard. "Too many people in here. Come on out into the hall. I want to say something to you." I stepped out into the hall with him. He smiled. He was very warm, very personal. "That was a wonderful test," he said. "You're going to be a big star." Then he focused on my eyes, reached into his pocket, took out a small bottle, indicated his own eyes. "I have the same trouble," he said. "Try this, 2 drops each eye." "Mr. Barrymore, I have something in my eye." "Yes, dear, I know. Try it." And he was gone. I went back into the office. Do any of you by any chance happen to know an eye... But Cukor was saying, "Now, shall we go up to meet David Selznick? Then we'll cut your hair." And George led the way, and we went to meet David Selznick, who was busy, and said, "Oh, yes, just fine. He must have thought, well, so that's what we got." Then we went up to the far end of the lot where the hairdresser and makeup departments were. Very speedily my hair was cut off, leaving enough to curl. Head of the makeup wasn't there. Back to Cukor's office. It was late. "Well, tomorrow then," he said, "at 9, I'll call you." "Do you happen to know an eye doc? I have something in my..." And I was talking to no one. George and his entourage were gone. They just all disappeared. The day was over. Laura and I walked out of the office. On the street outside there was a man standing. "I beg your pardon," I said, "but do you happen to know an eye doctor? I have something in my eye." "Oh, dear, yes, so you have. Well, I'm a doctor, but, you need an eye man." He telephoned around. He found a woman doctor who was still in her office. Yes, she'd see us. We went into downtown Los Angeles. That was quite a trip. She took a look. 3 steel filings embedded. I could hear them click against her knife. She got them out. She dug them out. Flick, flick went the white of my eye, like celluloid. The next morning I went to the studio with a patch. A bill of divorcement, which is to be my first picture. John Barrymore, my father, Billy Burke, my mother, Elizabeth Patterson, my aunt, and David Manners, my beau. George Cukor was the director. We quickly had hair tests, makeup tests, got the clothes together. The plan was to shoot all of Barrymore's scenes first and get him out of the picture, save the money. He was expensive. What an odd man, full of charm, a wonderful actor, a generous spirit, a wild sort of, general passion for the opposite sex, but really not caring a bit whether or not he succeeded. He asked me to come to his dressing room on the lot one day. I went, knocked on the door. He said, "Come in." I did, and there he was, lying on his couch in a, well, what shall I say, comparative disarray. I must have looked totally blank. There was a pause, a quick shuffle of the blankets. Oh, I'm sorry. See you later," he said. I went. Oh, my, how very strange. Anyway, he was an angel after that. Feeble attempt, or whatever you want to call it. His main object after that really seemed to be absolutely certain that I made a big hit. He held my face to the camera in our many scenes together. He was sweet, he was funny, and he could certainly act. I was very lucky to have had such a wonderful opportunity. When I had finished a bill of divorcement, I went to Europe fast with Luddy, on the chance that they would call me and tell me that I was a hit. I went to Schiaparelli's, got myself a costume to get off the boat in, just in case, a 3/4 coat and a skirt and blouse and a knitted hat of knit to, purl to, very easy to wear. I'd heard in Vienna that I'd made a big hit, so I was prepared. This was my first French outfit. They took the picture to Santa Barbara to preview. It was very well received. When we knew definitely that it was a hit and that I was a hit, Luddy and I switched our tickets from steerage to first class. I'd got off to a flying start with the bill of divorcement, followed by the films Christopher Strong, Morning Glory, Little Women, and then Spitfire, all in the space of 1 year, actually a year and a half. 7 months in 32 and almost all of 1933. I even won an Academy Award for Morning Glory. Then came The Lake. I have to explain to you my next, what shall we say, step. I was sort of full of myself, as you can imagine. All my success in California, and now back to New York, my position was, well, yes, I was secure, and my relationship with former friends was different. I had definitely made it to the first hilltop. I was someone to be reckoned with. Actually, other people put you in this position. They look up to you, and from your new spot you try to pretend that you're unaware of any change. Back in New York, I thought we needed more room. Luddy and I found the house I'm now in. It was for rent furnished, $100 a month, 1932. And so we moved in, and we moved in the little furniture we had, and finally, in about 1937, I guess it was, I bought the same house for $27,500. Luddy only tried to help me in my career. He never mentioned the fact that with Aunt and Mrs. Bottle and the warrior's husband, I was of necessity climbing a ladder which was going to take me away from him. He took care of me. He'd moved his business to New York just so that it would be convenient for me. When I left Luddy and went to Hollywood on July 4th, 1932, it turned out to be the beginning of the end of our marriage. What the hell would I have done without Luddy? my protector, I would have been frightened away from the big city, and I would have shriveled up and I would have died. And Luddy, all he wanted was me. And of course, all I wanted was to be a great big hit in the movies. Now I'm horrified at what an absolute pig I was. Dear Luddy, he'd always meet the train or the plane when I came back from Hollywood. He'd drive me to Fenwick or to Hartford. He took another apartment. We were separated, then we were divorced in Yucatan, Mexico. I didn't think that divorce was any good, but I thought it made our position clear. He continued to do for me any and every possible kindness. You couldn't be expected to believe this, but it was in early 1941, when I was going around with Spencer Tracy, that Spence said to me, "Why do you keep stringing Luddy along? Why don't you stop using him?" And I thought, well, I finally used what sense of sensitivity I had, and I stopped using him, and in about 6 months he was married. He had 2 children, a boy and a girl. Then his wife died. Well, then means 25 years later. Luddy began to be sick. I used to stop and see how he was. Finally, I began trying to do things for him. For a while he'd come to Fenwick. Then he had inoperable cancer, and he'd be in and out of the hospital, and slowly he faded away. I really struggled to give back to him some of the love and the kindness and the extreme selflessness which he'd given to me. But, oh dear, I've left out the most awful instant. Listen to this. I made him change his name from Ludlow Ogden Smith to S. Ogden Ludlow. I didn't want to be called Mrs. Smith. I thought it was melancholic, Kate Smith, and I couldn't even sing. I hope you realize that I'm remembering all this now. I'm looking back and I'm realizing what the truth was, the motives back of the action. I don't think it was, I hope it wasn't all as cold-blooded as it sounds. I hope not. But the truth has to be that I was a terrible pig. My aim was me all the way, up, down, all about. Can you see how responsible Luddy was for my beginning? Absolute generosity. No strings. Give. You just don't find people like that in life. Jed Harris was one of the most successful producers to reach Broadway in the middle of the late 20s. He had endless hits and he made millions. Then he struck a lull until Our Town in 1938. When I first got to New York in the fall of 28, he was flourishing, and I used to drive him around in my car as the 30s began. And then I went to Hollywood in 1932. And when I returned to New York in 33, I was a big hit, and I had won the Academy Award for Morning Glory. As Jed, became less successful, I became more so. Everything I did seemed to work. I apparently thought that I would renew Jed's luck if I did the lake for him. Although his career as a Broadway producer had tumbled, he was still in his own attitude toward himself, and to me, the king of the roost. Modesty was a quality which he did not deal in. He had a way of treating you as if you were sort of an inferior creature, and of course I'd known him when I definitely was on a lower rung of the ladder than he was. Now the situation was reversed, but neither Jed nor I could admit this. He was the genius, and I was the lucky mutt. When I got back to New York, I called him to say hello. "Oh, how are you?" he said. "How are you? I was about to call you. Have a play which you might enjoy doing. I'll send it to you." What he sent was The Lake by Dorothy Massingham. My attitude toward the play was really cockeyed. I can't remember what I thought of it as a play, as an evening in the theatre. I think I was anxious simply to be a help to Jed. I hardly dare say this. I actually thought that if I did the play, it would, of necessity, get him back on his feet. I thought that his position must be very embarrassing to him, and now that I was important, I felt that as well as the little mother of all the world, I could help him resume his proper status. How I could have been this dumb, I don't know. My relationship with Jed had indeed been curious. Rehearsals started at the Martin Beck, 45th Street, west of Broadway, big theatre. We weren't worried. We could fill it. Tony Minor was directing. Nice man. I was there doing my enthusiastic best, which wasn't a very dependable best. I was in my mid-20s, had exaggeratedly been referred to as the new Doozer Bernhardt. While I knew that all this adulation wasn't exactly deserved, still, well, I did seem to have something. Just what it was, I wasn't sure, and when it would happen, I certainly wasn't sure either. The acting, I mean, and this was indeed perilous. I could make them laugh, I could make them cry, but the atmosphere had to be perfect. Okay, in movies. Disaster on the stage. Well, after the first week of rehearsal, Jed fired Tony. Helen Hayes, whom I barely knew, sent me a message saying, "Don't let Jed direct you. He'll destroy your confidence." But I was young. I was unique. Oh, I can get on with anyone, I thought. So I disregarded her advice. Why Jed fired Tony Minor, I never knew. I suppose that he just wanted to direct it himself. Tony had given me confidence. The other actors gave me confidence. They were sweet to me. Of course, I know now that they must have been beginning to suspect what they were in for. From the very beginning, Jed seemed to be setting out to destroy my one commodity, my confidence, or else he just didn't like what I could do. If I turned left, he said turn right. If I made a gesture with one hand, he said make it with the other. I sat, he said stand. It was undoing. We opened in Washington. I was terrified. Bit by bit, my confidence had left me, and confidence was all I had. Under perfect circumstances and conditions, I could deliver a sort of naive and forthright laugh and cry, but to force myself to concentrate in a state of terror was still beyond me. At the National Theatre in Washington, D.C., sold out to the rafters, I really walked through the play in a daze. A few things hit, but mostly missed. I could actually feel the attention of the audience recede like the tide. I went through the motions. There was no heart in any of it, no joy. Jed came back to my dressing room, stood in the doorway, and said, "Perfection. I could do no more." "No more?" I asked. Well, I didn't understand what he was talking about. "No more rehearsals," he said. "We open in New York next week." I was stunned. Well, couldn't we keep it out for a bit until I know what the hell I'm doing? "Not necessary," he said, and he was gone. Next morning came the reviews. They told me that they weren't bad at all. Now, I don't read reviews. I just don't see the sense. It's too late to help one way or the other. But, of course, I get the general feel, good, bad, great. In this instance, I thought that the critics were just being kind, or perhaps they were reluctant to demolish the new Wonder Girl. My own judgment told me that I had simply failed to deliver, and I set about talking myself into disaster. I got worse and worse, and the New York tickets were selling like hotcakes. We went back to New York. I kept hoping that I'd drop dead, but I didn't. We weren't rehearsing at all, not at all. Now, it could be that Jed felt that he'd over-directed me and that he was letting me find my way back, but by this time, back to where? The trail had grown over. I was lost. Inevitably, they arrived. Dress rehearsal, opening night. Luckily, I was tough. My cue came. I walked on, and I walked through the whole opening night. It was perfectly awful. I was like an automaton. My voice got higher and higher. I prayed to myself. No use, I just went on and on and on and on. I hadn't died. I was there. I was fully conscious of having given a totally nothing performance. My family was there, of course, out front. Noah Coward was sitting right in back of my sister Peg, a beautiful young girl, and he was overheard to say, "Kate's sister looks the way Kate should have, but didn't." Noah came backstage. This time he said, "Yes, you mucked it up, dear, you mucked it up. But that happens to all of us. You'll get roasted. Keep at it. You'll find the way." And indeed I was roasted, and I became the irresistible butt of all the New York wits. Dorothy Parker summed it up. Go to the Martin Beck and Z.K.H. Run the gamut of emotion from A to B. The box office fell at the rate of $1,200 a week. We'd had a very substantial advance for something like 10 weeks, and it began to look as though we'd run just about that length of time. No one with any sense was buying tickets. Those which had been sold could not be returned. The production which had not been expensive would pay off. My main task now was to see whether I could learn to act under fire and to learn how to be a star. I hadn't been either. I'd lost my nerve, I'd moaned, I'd not passed the exam, I had not delivered the goods, and I had let everyone know that I was absolutely miserable and terrified. Well, as one goes through life, one learns that if you don't paddle your own canoe, you won't move. After the shock of the opening, we settled down to the gradual demise. People came out of curiosity, or whatever it is, in diminishing numbers. I, very, very slowly, I was trying to pick up the pieces. I at least had the brains to know who was really at the bottom of the failure. Me. Jed had not done his best work, certainly, but my contribution had been a disgrace. One night a woman came back to my dressing room, very tall she was, very fat. "I'm Susan Steele," she said. "I'm a singer. I think I could help you." I looked at her. "Well," I said, "if you can help me, I certainly need help. When do we start?" "Now," she said. We went back to my house. We talked about vocal troubles. Next day we worked on the scenes which seemed to be causing me the most trouble. And voice, ever voice, and joy. You must not be a victim. That night and every night she came to the play. Bit by bit by bit I pulled myself back from that cliffhang of terror, and I began to be able to take myself in hand, and slowly my confidence returned. It was thrilling, and it was thrilling what you can do, what we can do with ourselves if we really try. My dignity returned. I stopped making excuses, and I began to try to look at myself as the leader of a group, not a poor little thing who was trying her best and had been mistreated. I was learning to act. I was learning to be a star. About the third week, Joe Glick, our company manager, came to my dressing room and he said, "Jed is taking the play to Chicago." But my God, they don't like it. They certainly don't like me, but they didn't like Jed's work either, and we've paid off. Why? Joe Glick looked me in the eye. He shrugged. Money. I troubled about it for a week or so, and then one night about 3 a.m. I called Jed at his house. I had not seen hide and hair of Jed since the opening night. "Jed," I said, "I understand that you're planning to send us on the road, Chicago." "Yes," he said. "But Jed, why? I was roasted. But let's face it, so were you. Why send it out to—" He interrupted me. "My dear, the only interest I have in you is the money I can make out of you." Plain talk, I thought. "How much?" I asked. "How much have you got?" he said. I reached for my bank book, which I kept in the bookcase next to my bed. "I've got $13,675.75 in the Chase National Bank." "I'll take that," he said. "I'll send you a check in the morning," I said. And that was that. I sent him the check, and when the receipts dwindled to a non-profit point, we closed. Several years later, Jed went to Hollywood, and he asked Myron Selznick to help him get a job. Myron said, "You've asked the wrong person. I'm Kate's agent. Kate Hepburn's agent. She doesn't like you." "Why?" said Jed. "Why doesn't she like me?" "You took all her money to close the lake." "Well, I didn't know that she was upset about that," said Jed. "She was," said Myron. "I'll send her a check," said Jed. So I got the check, but I never cashed it. I tore it up. Sad money. I'd learned a lot, I hoped. Next time around, no one was going to know that I was terrified. The hand on the tiller was going to be as firm as a rock, even if the ship was sinking. The captain goes down with the ship, but he doesn't yowl about it. He just quietly does his best. That's really all there was to it. George Cukor was really my best friend in California. I'd arrived in Hollywood only a few years after he did. We made many pictures together: Bill of Divorcement, Little Women, Sylvia Scarlett, Holiday, Philadelphia Story, Keeper of the Flame, Adam's Rib, Pat and Mike, Cornice Green, Love Among the Ruins. Always happily, always happily. Must have had the same set of standards. We both adored the business, we loved to work, and we admired each other. His was an extraordinary career, and yet he is seldom listed with the so-called great directors: John Huston, George Stevens, Ford, Willie Wyler, Billy Wilder, Hitchcock. I think I finally figured out why. He was primarily an actor's director. He was primarily interested in making the actor shine. He saw the story through the eyes of the leading actors. George also loved to entertain, and I loved to be his guest. Right off, he'd bought a house, a modest one-story house on Cordell Drive, in the hills above Sunset. George was a success, and his house grew, and it grew, and it grew. First the property, from a lot to several acres, then the house. The old dining room lost its head, grew taller by 10 feet. It was dark and sort of disappeared upward, lit entirely by candles. You could hardly see. We all looked delicious. The china, the linen, the silver, the glass. Oh, I beg your pardon, I mean crystal. Shining, exquisite, a delight. George himself picked it out for any and whatever occasion. He loved all his treasures. They represented his dream, a child's dream, that once-upon-a-time dream. The flowers in the center of the table were always too high, and I used to sneak in before dinner and cut them down, if possible, so that we could see each other. I usually sat at the wrong end of the table. That's where I struck up a friendship with Irene Selznick. She, like me, was one of George's dependables. The food was great, the company the best. I was there at dinner once. A dessert, a beautiful cake came in, 70 candles. Judy Garland quietly stood up, and in her own particularly hushed and heartbreaking voice she sang, "Happy birthday, dear Ethel." It was Ethel Barrymore's 70th birthday. We all wept with joy and feeling and whatever it is. It was romantic. All the shine and that Selznick, Bryce, Judy, Spencer, Peck, Walpole, Maugham, atmosphere. Oh, well, it was all fun, and it was posh, and it was pretty, and lovely and exciting, and the conversation matched. We laughed. We enjoyed life. Thank you, George Cukor, dear friend. It was lovely. No smog in your thinking. No drink, no pills. Just the energy to make your dreams come true. I have to tell you now about what happened during the filming of the movie Sylvia Scarlett. This picture we were shooting with George Cukor directing, Cary Grant the leading man, and my father, Edmund Gwenn. We shot a lot of it out beyond Trancas Beach in California. George and I used to alternate having gorgeous picnic lunches sent from home. One day, an aeroplane circled overhead, and it circled and circled, and then it landed on a dime in the field next to us. Too close. Who could that be, I thought. Cary Grant piped up, "That's my friend, Howard Hughes." I was somewhat taken aback because I'd heard it rumored that Hughes would like to meet me, and apparently this was how he'd figured it out. I gave Cary a very black look, and we all had lunch, and I never looked at Howard. What a nerve! The next step, I was playing golf with the pro at the Bel Air Country Club. We were on the 7th, about to finish a 9-hole lesson. The noise of an aeroplane. Howard landed practically on top of us, took his clubs out of the plane, and he finished the 9 with us. He had to have a truck come in and practically take the plane apart to remove it from the course. I must say it gave me pause. I thought he had a hell of a nerve, and he was very pushy. The club was furious. Howard Hughes was nothing daunted. The next time, about 2 months later, I saw in the paper that Howard was in Boston. At the same time, I was playing Jane Eyre in Boston, a play by Helen Jerome. I was staying at the Ritz Hotel. We were playing at the Colonial Theatre. Howard moved into the same hotel. Well, I think I must have been lonely because Howard and I had supper with one another after the performance that first night, thus proving that persistence pays. We had supper the next night, too. So, Howard Hughes was a curious fellow. He had guts and he had a really fine mind, but he was deaf, quite seriously deaf. And he was apparently incapable of saying, "Please speak up, I'm deaf." Thus, he was, with more than one person, he was apt to miss most of the conversation. This was tragic, but he was absolutely incapable of changing. I think that this weakness went a long way toward ruining Howard's life and making him into an oddball. He followed us on the tour. We played Chicago. I stayed at the Ambassador Hotel. Howard took a suite there, too. Yes, the same floor. Yes. Oh, yes, you're right, of course. Inevitable. The papers began to put us in headlines. Hughes and Hepburn were married today. I couldn't move from that city without being followed. Howard followed the tour. Detroit, Cleveland, Chicago. He conducted his life on the telephone because there he could hear. Finally, the tour was over. We went back to California, moved into his house, which backed onto the Wilshire Country Club golf course. Well, this was fun because we could just jump the fence and play golf. We had a very pleasant life. Occasionally, I would go east to see my family. I remember once I said goodbye to Howard, left for the airport. I was sitting on the plane ready to leave, luggage boarded, and a man in uniform came up to me and he said, "Mr. Hughes says you're not to go. The weather is bad." Embarrassed, I got off the plane, sending the rest of the passengers to their doom, of course. Well, of course, they were all fine. Nothing happened. But it was a very peculiar experience. I used to fly everywhere with Howard, across the country, here, there. Howard taught me to fly. I took off once under the 59th Street Bridge in New York City. Once at Fenwick, we flew to Newport to watch the boat races. "I smell smoke," I said. "Well, what the hell do you think I've been smelling?" he asked. We flew back to New London, put out the fire. Well, it was certainly always exciting. My family were not too sympathetic to Howard. In the first place, he was everlastingly on the telephone. And the telephone was in the dining room, and we were a big family, and we always had visitors. Long telephone conversations simply did not suit the atmosphere. And Luddy was always there, too, especially on the golf course, and he was ever present with his movie camera. And Howard couldn't stand this, and he objected. Dad made his famous remark, "Howard, Luddy has been taking pictures of all of us for many years before you joined us, and he will be taking them long after you have left. He is part of this family. Go ahead now, Howard, drive. You need a 7-iron. Howard, in a fury, drove. He landed 6 feet from the pin. He was a good golfer, and he sank a 2. Not bad in a pinch. He was cool. During this period, my career had taken a real nosedive. It was then that the box office poison label began to appear. The independent theater owners were trying to get rid of Marlene Dietrich, Joan Crawford, and me, especially me. It seems that they were forced to take our pictures if they got certain ones which they really wanted. Actually, I felt sorry for them. I'd made a string of very dull movies: Sylvia Scarlett, Woman Rebels, Quality Street, Break of Hearts. On the good side, I had done Alice Adams with Fred MacMurray, Stage Door with Ginger Rogers, Bringing Up Baby and Holiday, both with Cary Grant. These last 4 were very good pictures, but I'd apparently become someone the independents avoided because of the 4 dull preceding pictures. I decided that I'd better go back east and do a play or something. Paramount had sent me a script for which they offered me a salary of $10,000. That was a cut from $150,000. I called them. I thanked them very much. I told them it was the only offer I'd had, and that I was sorry, but I did not like the script. Howard was very upset with this. He was really anxious to have me make a picture. I thought it would be a terrible mistake. He was very conscious of what he thought people were saying about him. He felt that I was embarrassed by my failure. Well, somehow I wasn't embarrassed by my failure. Well, obviously it mattered, but not enough to govern my actions. Howard and I were indeed a strange pair. I think that, reluctantly, he found me a very appropriate companion, and I think I found him extremely appropriate, too. He was sort of the top of the available men, and I was the top of the available women. We were a colourful pair. It seemed logical for us to be together, but it seems to me now that we were too similar. He came from the right street, so to speak, and so did I. We'd been brought up in ease. We each had a wild desire to be famous. I think that this was a dominant character failure. People who want to be famous are really loners, or they should be. Certainly, I felt that I was madly in love with him, and I think he felt the same way about me. But when it came right down to, what do we do now? I went east, and he stayed west. It was the end of 1937, the beginning of 38. We'd been together about 3 years. Ambition beat love, or was it like? Again, as I look back, I have to realize that I took what I considered a good business step, and I didn't let my personal life dominate my actions. I did not want to marry Howard. I was not in the business of capturing anyone into a marriage. I liked the idea of being my own single self. Even when I was living with Spencer Tracy and he and I were together for 27 years, we never really thought about or discussed marriage. He was married, and I wasn't interested. I went to Fenwick, which was in full flower. June, the weather was heavenly. Golf, tennis, swimming, sailing, ever available. The family were there. They were all there, and it was fun. The people there were not really aware of my peculiar predicament in the business, so it was never discussed. Dad certainly knew that there was no cash coming in, but he had thought that a career in theatre movies was a very chancy occupation, and this sudden lull didn't surprise him. One day the telephone rang, and it was the writer, Phil Barry, in Maine. "I have an idea," he said, "Kate. I have an idea. I want to talk to you." "Fine," I said. "Come on down any time." He arrived. People came often to tea, and finally Phil said, "Look, can't we go somewhere? I want to talk to you alone." We went out to the pier, and we sat down. And Phil said that he had 2 plots, one about a father and daughter, and the second, the Philadelphia story. Well, that Philadelphia story, I thought that sounded the better one to me. Phil left, and in a few weeks he sent me a draft of the first act. I read it. I was thrilled. I called Howard. I told him I had a thrilling new project. Howard said, "Buy the film rights before you open," and he bought the movie rights to the Philadelphia story for me, which ensured my success later. The next day, God sent the hurricane of 1938. The house at Fenwick completely disappeared. Howard had a pilot fly in with bottled water, and I knew that Howard and I had become friends and not lovers. Love had turned to water, pure water, but water. Louis B. Mayer and I were friends. He was the head of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. I liked him, he liked me. I sold him quite a number of properties. He gave me a lot of freedom. I gave him a lot of respect. L.B. had a sense of romance about the movie business and the studio system. I must say I did too. It was a glorious time to be in the business. My beginning with Mayer started, as I told you, when my career was apparently coming to an end and I was offered a cut of about 150% in salary. I read the Paramount script, I turned it down, and went back east. Then Phil Barry wrote the Philadelphia story. Howard Hughes bought the movie rights for me. Nobody knew it for 9 months. All the obvious ladies in the business wanted to buy it for themselves. I said to Harold Friedman, the literarian, don't tell anyone that I own it. He was one of the few men in the world who could keep his trap shut. Finally, people began to realize that I had some sort of control over it. I met Mayer one night. Norma Shearer was with him, and he said, I'd like to talk to you. I said, fine. He said, can I come and see you? I said, no, Mr. Mayer, I'll come and see you. So I went over to the office, and he said that he would like to buy the Philadelphia story. He said, do you want to do it? I said, yes, I do. He said, well, we'd like to have you do it. He talked to me so shrewdly. He would talk to one person one way, and then he'd talk to another person another way. He said things that would really charm me. He then asked me what I wanted for it, and I told him that I wouldn't be making any profit. I said, what interests me is who do I play it with, because people say that I'm poison at the box office, so I want it cast. And he said, who do you want? And I said, well, give me Tracy and Gable. He said, I don't think they'll do it. I said, I presume that they probably wouldn't, but ask them. He said, yes, I'll ask them. He did, and they said they wouldn't do it. Then he said, Miss Hepburn, I can give you Jimmy Stewart because we have control over him. Then he added, I'll give you $150,000 to get anyone else you want or can get. You can name the director. I said I'd like George Cukor to direct it. He said, fine. Then we got Cary Grant for the $150,000 for 3 weeks' work. He said that he wanted first billing over me. I said, that's fine, easy. He gave his salary to the Red Cross. He said he had his choice of parts, and Jimmy Stewart would play the other part. Incidentally, Jimmy won the Academy Award. So Mayer and I continued our history together. We had a kind of arrangement that I would usually bring things to Mayer first, and I brought them a lot of material, always managed to deal with Mayer. I always said that I liked to work for Metro because they knew how to get you across Chicago. That was the truth. They handled your life, the whole thing, with class. They paid less money, but they didn't force you to do something you didn't want to do. Mayer never tried to use force or say, I'll take your money away. They did not force their people. It was a paternalistic organization in the best and the worst sense of the word. I think Mayer, Goldwyn, and Sol Hurok were romantics. Hal Wallace was a romantic, too. All those early men, I think they were brilliant businessmen, but they were chasing a dream. They could hear it, they could catch it, they could see beauty, and it fascinated them. It's the fairy tale, isn't it, of this business? Oh, hell, we read fairy tales for years, don't we? Are they throwing all that out? If you don't dream up your parents, your brother, your sister, your friends, the person you love, if you can't dream them up, if you just see them total, 4-letter word, reality, then God help you. You've got to dream up everything. I believe in miracles. I believe that here we are, and we can be in severe physical trouble, but if our spirits aren't in severe physical trouble, then we can rise up out of it. That's what we've got that all the animals really haven't got. I think Mayer had that. He was wild. He was a romantic. He believed. When I tested for the movies, it was immediately a warm experience. Exciting, not scary. Why this is, I do not know. I just find this medium sympathetic, friendly. It must be that there's no audience, no critics in the immediate situation, and the camera never talks back to you. It was fun. I made 43 pictures. When I left Hollywood, I expected that I would remember most of the pictures and the people who were in them. Well, the fact is, I don't. Why you remember certain things is curious. Usually there's a story or there's something special which brings them to mind. So here are some of the things which I seem to remember. 1937, Bringing Up Baby, Howard Hawks director, Cary Grant, Charlie Ruggles, May Robeson, and The Leopard. This script was a good one. Cary Grant was really wonderful, and he was so funny on this picture. He was fatter, and at this point his boiling energy was at its very peak. We would laugh from morning till night. Hawks was fun, too. He usually got to work late. Cary and I were always there early. Everyone contributing. They contributed anything and everything they could think of to that script. Cary had always refused to work with the leopard. He didn't care for that leopard at all. I didn't have enough brains to be scared, so I did a lot of scenes with the leopard just roaming around. Olga Celeste, the trainer, had a big whip, and we were inside a cage. Olga Celeste and I and the leopard. No one else. The camera and the sound were picked up through holes in the vents. The first scene I had was in a floor-length negligee walking around. I was talking madly on the telephone. It had a long cord. The leopard followed me around, pushing at my thigh, which they'd covered with perfume. The scene went very satisfactorily. Then I changed into a knee-length dress, with tabs on the bottom of the skirt covering small metal pieces to make the skirt swing prettily. Well, it swang all right, but at a large bud, one quick swirl, and that leopard made a spring for my back, and Olga Celeste brought the whip down right on its head. And that was the end of my freedom with the leopard. The idea for Woman of the Year was by Garson Kanin, his brother Mike Kanin, and Ring Lardner Jr. Garson showed me the 78-page outline, and I called Joe Mankiewicz in California, who'd produced the Philadelphia story at MGM. Would he care to read it? It was for Spencer Tracy and for me, and it was to be directed by George Stevens. Joe said he'd read it, and he'd call me back, and he read it, and he liked it, and he said that the studio would be interested, and I said I'd come out to California. I'd always thought Spencer Tracy a wonderful actor, but when Garson said, wouldn't Spencer Tracy be great as the man in the movie, Garson said, I answered, oh, I don't know. I wonder whether we'd be good together. We're so different. Now, Garson also said that when he suggested the same thing to Spencer Tracy, that he had a script that would be wonderful for Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, Spencer had said, oh, really? Really? You think we'd be good together? We're we're so different. I, of course, don't remember this at all. I remember only how perfect I thought Spence would be as anyone and how great we would be together. And I think, I don't know, maybe God's probably right, and I'm so blinded by years of whatever you want to call it that my memory is not trustworthy. Another report about Spencer Tracy, he's supposed to have said, how can I do a picture with a woman who has dirt under her fingernails and who is of ambiguous sexuality and always wears pants? Well, after he saw the Philadelphia story, he changed his mind. True or false, whoever knows. One day, in 1950, Sam Spiegel sent me The African Queen by C.S. Forrester. I read it. What a story. I was thrilled. We met, John Huston and I. Sam Spiegel had just bought the book. They weren't sure whom they were going to have for the man. At first, John felt it should be an authentic Cockney. But when they began to think of Bogey, there was no one who could compete with him in personality or looks. They had him be a Canadian. Can you imagine anyone else in that part? John Huston was an amazing character. He had flashes, and those flashes were brilliant. When he told me to base my character of Rosie in The African Queen on Eleanor Roosevelt when she visited the hospitals of the wounded soldiers, always with a smile on her face, he said he felt that I was playing Rosie too seriously, and that since my mouth turned down anyway, it was making the scenes heavy. Since I, as Rosie, was the sister of a minister, my approach to everyone and everything had to be full of hope, a smile. That was indeed a flash of brilliance. In short, he had told me exactly how to play the part. I kept asking for a script, but none appeared. John flew to Africa with Peter Vittel, who was helping him with the script. I felt foreboding. Bogey, who'd worked with John Huston before, said, don't worry, this is the way he does it." "But wow," I said. "You'll see," said Bogey, "it's worth it." So I went along with Bogey, and he won the award. And the people still go in droves. What more can you ask? Summertime was a picture done from The Time of the Cuckoo, a play by Arthur Lawrence. They called me and said David Lean was going to direct it. Would I be in... They didn't need to finish that sentence. I certainly would be interested in anything that David Lean was going to direct. So I said yes, and it was, of course, going to be done in Venice, and Constance Collier, my friend, and Phyllis Wilburn, her secretary, were going to go with me. And I found an apartment on the Grand Canal almost opposite the Gritty, beautifully furnished, 2 stories, 3 bedrooms, 3 baths. We had our own gondola. It was perfection. David lived in the Gritty. He was busy working on the script. He threw out everything but the main plot of a desperately lonely secretary who finally found Rossano Brazzi, had a lovely affair with him and then left him to go back to the United States. The story was told with great simplicity in the streets, in the Piazza San Marco. We would shoot in tiny streets only a few feet wide. The sun would come and go in a matter of seconds. It was a very emotional part, and I tell you, I had to be on my toes to give David enough of what he wanted, practically on cue. It was thrilling, though, and the music he picked was perfect. It was fascinating to work for David Lean. He was very basic, he was simple, he was true, he told a story. It's a slice of life, you understand, in all its detail. He photographed what he saw in his mind's eye. It was the most extraordinary gift. He seemed to me to simply absorb Venice. It was his. He had a real photographic gift. He thought in a descriptive way. His shots tell you the story. He was capable of a sort of super concentration. It made a very definite impression on me, and he was one of the most interesting directors I ever worked with. He had to get exactly the performance he wanted out of each actor so they would fit in with what he had in his mind's eye. Thus his pictures are all of a piece. He painted a picture, and it was his. The script for On Golden Pond was a play script. I went to Wilmington, Delaware to see it with Noel Wildman, the director of several plays, which I did. It was played by 2 people who were about 50 years old. They were very busy being old and slightly feeble. It was a good play. At the same time that I was trying to set it up as a movie, Jane Fonda found it too, and thought it would be a perfect setup for her father, Henry Fonda, and herself as the daughter, and me as the mother. I agreed, so she arranged it. Mark Rydell was to be the director. Squam Lake, New Hampshire, the location. Hank in one mead house, me in the mead house, belonging to the mother, and the mead house in the woods was our movie house, and all right on the lake. Being on the water, I could swim every day, which I did morning and nights. Funny thing, as a child I used to be dumped into a cold tub every morning, and I still swim. In winter, summer, doesn't matter. At Fenwick I go across a snowy lawn. My poor feet freeze, but I go in, I dip, I swim a stroke, 1 stroke, then I rush out. Anyway, it was a great setup, and it was also great fun to do. Jane and Hank were busy working out a rather complicated father-daughter relationship, and this was to be the solution. An ambitious father, an ambitious daughter, and they find their solution with me, an ambitious friend. We all had a very good time. The house I lived in was in the most commanding location, and often I would see Henry Fonda take his evening stroll along the base of my property, and I'd wonder, what is he thinking about? I never saw him in his bathing suit. Always just walking solemnly along, fully dressed, not hurrying, not going slowly, 1,000 miles away. He was an oddie. He was a good painter. I never felt that I knew him at all. He wasn't given to a lot of talk, and, well, neither was I. On Golden Pond was a very good study of the relationship of a husband and wife who they just really like each other. Hank and I were the right age. We were old, so we weren't busy acting old. Comes upon one unexpectedly. Suddenly you lose your spring. Your spring in the sense of elasticity. Now old. You don't spring up from a chair, you get up. It's a very different act. Henry had lost a little more spring than I had when we were doing the picture, and we slid very easily into our relationship. He was wonderful to play with, very true, very natural. He moved me deeply in that scene when he was beginning to crumble. Really wasn't acting at all. His daughter was damn good, too. Jane and I enjoyed our scenes together. At one moment in the picture, Jane had to do a back somersault into the water off a springboard, and I'd torture her by saying, "Listen, if you can't do it, dear, I'll do it for you. It's one of my specialties." You may be sure that she did it herself. Now I'm going to tell you about Spencer. You may think you've waited a long time, but let's face it, so did I. I was 33. Spencer Tracy is a star of real quality. He is an actor star. He is a people's star. His quality is clear. It's direct. Ask a question, get an answer. No pause, no fancy thinking. A simple answer. He speaks. He listens. He is not wordy. He is not over-emotional. He is simply and totally honest. He makes you believe what he is saying. Take Captain's Courageous, the Portuguese fisherman. This performance is, to me, one of the most shattering in his career. He wondered what he should do to make him stand out as a convincing character and accent. What should he do? Finally got the studio to call a real Portuguese fisherman so that he could question him about this and that. "Well," said Spencer, "I have to sing a song about little fish as I sit in the evening singing to the sea, and I've been wondering about this fellow's accent. Take, for instance, the word F-I-S-H. How would you pronounce it?" "Fish," said the man. "F-I-S-H. Well, that's fish, isn't it, Mr. Tracy?" "Yeah, well," said Spencer, "you wouldn't say fish?" "Well, no. I mean, fish is fish. I-S-H, not S-S-H. Mr. Tracy?" It was a hopeless conversation. Spencer wound up calling it fish. It seemed to fit the moment. Curly dark hair and fish. Then I saw fury, the transposition of a good man into a monster. He became a fury locked in the body of a perfectly ordinary man, a body which was suddenly too small to contain him. He seemed to use himself, his body, as a container, a sort of box filled with the whole run of human emotions. His performance an abstraction, a manifestation of character, is so remarkable that it is as total as birth or death, and needs no outer clothing, no accent, no makeup. The exterior was not applied. In other words, it became automatically the mirror of the passions whirling around inside him. So to us, the audience, his face would really be hampered by any makeup or applied comment. Spencer's face was his canvas, and he painted from the inside out with magic. One of the most fascinating examples of this unique quality was seen in Jekyll and Hyde, Spencer's biggest and his only real flop. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer decided to do the picture. Spencer became involved. He was persuaded to don a large amount of makeup as Hyde, a wig, false teeth, all the usual fixings. This was not Tracy's style. He felt idiotic. He was so embarrassed by all this paraphernalia. He used to drive down the lot in a limousine with the shades closed. The picture was one of the few in which Spence got bad notices. Naturally, it's very embarrassing when you do a big picture with a famous part and you fail in the famous part. When I met Spence, The subject was on his mind. Since I didn't know him, I was careful to see him in every picture that he'd done, and that included Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. "Very interesting," I said. No, nothing was rotten. "I just can't do that sort of thing," he said. "It's like constructing a dummy and then trying to breathe life into it. I like to be the dummy myself and then force people to believe that I'm whatever I want them to believe, inside out instead of outside in, no makeup." Well, it's too late now, but believe it or not, when they first mentioned Jekyll and Hyde, I was thrilled. I'd always been fascinated by their story, and I saw it as a story of two sides of a man. I felt Jekyll was a very respectable doctor, a fine member of society. He'd proposed to a lovely girl who was about to marry her. Then there was another side to the man. Every once in a while, Jekyll would go on a trip, and either because of drink or dope or who knows what, he would become, or should I say turn into, Mr. Hyde. Then, in a town or neighborhood where he was totally unknown, he would perform incredible acts of cruelty and vulgarity. The emotional side of Jekyll was obviously extremely disturbed. The girl, as his fiancée, is a proper lady, but as his fantasy whore, the girl matched his Mr. Hyde. She would be capable of the lowest behavior. The two girls should be played by the same actress, and the two men would be me. Oddly enough, when he had this notion, I was the girl that he had in mind. At this time we'd never met. I wondered why he had happened to light upon this notion for Jekyll and Hyde. That notion, I couldn't get it out of my mind. Was there some very personal connotation? The complication of our natures certainly seemed to be infinite. A dose of this, a dose of that, stir it up and out we come, most of us all tied up in ourselves. The actor has an advantage here. The actor can escape into creation. The perfect actor, to my mind, Spencer Tracy, could stand in his own footsteps and change before your very eyes. With no utensils, with magic and the electricity of his thoughts, he became someone else. He made you laugh, he terrified you, he made you cry. He convinced you that he was the man outside of himself. But that left him with himself, didn't it? Who was he? I never really knew. He'd locked the door to the inside room. I have no idea even whether he himself had the key. I only suspected that inside that room was a powerful engine which ran 24 hours a day at full speed, and it turned out some remarkable people. Yes, all those different people. Someone asked me when I fell for Spencer. Well, I can't remember. It was right away, I should think, right away. We started our first picture together, and I knew right away that I found him irresistible. Just exactly that, irresistible. It seems to me I discovered with Spencer what I love you really means. It means I put you and your interests and your comfort ahead of my own interest and my own comfort because I love you. There is an enormous difference between love and like. Usually we use the word love when we really mean like. I think that very few people ever mean love. Love has nothing to do with what you're expecting to get. It only has to do with what you are expecting to give, which is everything. What you will receive in return varies, but it really has no connection with what you give. You give because you love, and you cannot help giving. If you are very lucky, you may be loved back. This is delicious, but it does not necessarily happen. It really implies total devotion, and total is all-encompassing, the good of you, the bad of you. I am aware that I must include the bad. I loved Spencer Tracy. He and his interests and his demands came first. This was not easy for me because I was definitely a me person. It was a unique feeling that I had for Spencer. I would have done anything for him, anything at all. My feelings, how can you describe them? The door between us was always open. There were no reservations of any kind. He didn't like this or that. I changed this and that. They might be qualities which I personally valued. Didn't matter. I changed them. Food, we ate what he liked, we did what he liked, we lived a life which he liked. This gave me great pleasure, the thought that this was pleasing him. Certainly I had not felt this way with my other beaux. I was waiting for them to please me. What was it about Spencer that fascinated me? Well, that's not a difficult question to answer. He had the most wonderful sense of humor. He was Irish to the fingertips. He could laugh and he could create laughter. He had a funny way of looking at things, at some things, I should say. People have asked me what it was about Spence that made me stay with him for nearly 30 years, and this is somehow, well, it's impossible for me to answer. I honestly don't know. I can only say I never could have left him. He was there. I was his. I wanted him to be happy, safe, comfortable. I liked to wait on him. I liked to listen to him. I liked to feed him, talk to him, work for him. I tried not to disturb him, irritate him, bother him, worry him, nag him. When he was sort of toward the end of his life, his last 6 or 7 years, I virtually quit work just to be there so that he wouldn't worry or be lonely. I was happy to do this. I painted, I wrote, I was peaceful, and I was hoping that he would live forever. What was it? I found him totally total. I really liked him deep down, and I wanted him to be happy. I don't think he was very happy. I don't mean that he did anything or said anything which would indicate that he was. Well, what is happy? I have a happy nature. I like the rain, I like the sun, I like the heat, the cold, the mountains, the sea, the flowers. Well, I like life, and I've been so lucky. Why shouldn't I be happy? Spencer didn't like cold. He didn't like too much heat. Well, he liked comfort. I think that states that he was a great actor, simple. He could just do it, never overdone, just perfection. Someone asked me why I said that Spencer Tracy was like a baked potato. I think it's because I think he was very basic as an actor. He was there, skins and all, in his performance. He was cooked and ready to eat. The only person to whom he could be compared is Laurette Taylor. Now, I must add that the baked potato description only refers to the incredible perfection of their performances in their lives. Well, Spencer was as far from a baked potato as possible. He was as complicated as a human being could be. He could not protect himself. I think most of us have a sort of shell of self-protection. We can hide behind it even when we're acting. Whatever the circumstance, we can protect ourselves. Spencer couldn't. He had no shell. Maybe that's why, at his most vulnerable age, he liked to drink, and he drank too much at times. He had a strong character. He could stop, and then sometimes he would never drink for a long time, year, 2, 3, 4, but he'd stop, and finally he didn't do it anymore. He didn't allow himself to get into situations which tormented him. Spencer and I made 9 pictures together: Woman of the Year, Keeper of the Flame, Without Love, Sea of Grass, State of the Union, Adam's Rib, Pat and Mike, Death's Set, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. We never rehearsed at home. We never used to discuss the script. It was curious. I always loved to work on the script about Spence. He'd read something, he'd say yes, or he'd say no. That was it. Someone asked me what about Spence and Mother and Dad. Well, of course, they met. We went to Hartford several times, to Fenwick, but they were never close. I think that they liked him, but Spence felt a bit uncomfortable with it. Well, after all, he was a married man. I don't think the Dad and Mother were bothered too much by this, but there it was, as far as Spence went, and he felt uncomfortable or unrelaxed. So we were seldom together when I went home. I have no idea how Spence felt about me. I can only say that if he hadn't liked me, he wouldn't have hung around, would he? As simple as that. He wouldn't talk about it, and I didn't talk about it. We just passed 27 years together in what was, to me, absolute bliss. It's called love. Dear Spence, whoever thought that I'd be writing you a letter? You died on the 10th of June in 1967. By golly, Spence, that's 24 years ago, that's a long time. Are you happy, finally? Is it a nice long rest you're having, making up for all your tossing and turning in life? You know, I never believed you when you said you just couldn't get to sleep. I thought, oh, come on, you sleep. If you didn't sleep, you'd be dead. You'd be so worn out. Then remember that night when, oh, I don't know, you felt so disturbed. And I said, well, go on in, go to bed. And I'll lie on the floor and I'll talk you to sleep. I'll just talk and you'll be so bored, you're just bound to drift off. Well, I went in and I got an old pillow and Lobo, the dog, and I lay there watching you and stroking old dog. I was talking about you and the movie we'd just finished. Guess who's coming to dinner? And my studio, and your new tweed coat and the garden and all the nice sleep-making topics, and cooking and dull gossip. But you never stopped tossing. To the right, to the left, shove the pillows, pull the covers, on. Finally, really finally, not just then, you quieted down. I waited a while, and then I crept out. You told me the truth, didn't you, Spence? You really could not sleep. And I used to wonder then why, and I still wonder. You took those pills, they were quite strong. I suppose you'd have to say that, otherwise you never would have slept at all. Living was not easy for you, was it? What did you like to do? You loved sailing, especially in stormy weather. You loved polo. But then Will Rogers was killed in that airplane accident. You never played polo again, never again, never. Tennis, golf? No, not really. You'd bat a few balls. Fair you were. I don't think you ever even swang a golf, swang a word. Swimming, well, you didn't like cold water. Walking, no, that didn't suit you. That was one of those things where you could think at the same time of this, of that, of what, Spence, of what? What was it? Was it some specific thing like your son Johnny being deaf or being a Catholic, and you felt a bad Catholic? No comfort. I remember Father Cyclic telling you that you concentrated on all the bad and none of the good things which your religion could offer. Must have been something very fundamental and ever-present. And the incredible fact, there you were, really the greatest movie act. I say this because it, and also I've heard so many other people of standing in your business say it. Olivier Lee Strasberg, David Lean, you could do it. And you could do it with that glorious simplicity and directness. You could just do it, but you couldn't enter your own life. You could become someone else. You were a killer, a priest, a fisherman, sports writer, a judge, a newspaper man. You were that in a second. You hardly had to study. You learned the lines in no time. What a relief. You could be someone else for a while. You weren't you. You were safe. You loved to laugh, didn't you? Didn't you? You never missed those individual comics, Jimmy Durante, Phil Silvers, Fanny Bryce, Frank McHugh, Mickey Rooney, Jack Benny, Burns and Allen, Smith and Dale, and your favorite Bert Williams. Funny stories, you could tell them, and brilliantly you could laugh at yourself. You enjoyed very much the friendship and admiration of people like the Canaans, Frank Sinatra, Bogey Betty, George Cukor, Vic Fleming, Stanley Kramer, the Kennedys, Harry Truman, Lou Douglas. You were fun with them, you had fun with them, you felt safe with them. And then back to life's trials. Oh, hell, take a drink. No, yes, maybe, then stop taking the drink. You were good at that, Spence. You were great. You could just stop. How I respected you for that. Very unusual. Well, you said on this subject, never safe until you're 7 feet underground. But why the escape hatch? Why was it always open to get away from the remarkable you? What was it, Spence? I meant to ask you. Did you know what it was? What did you say? What did you say? I can't hear you.